Welcome back to Rewind of the Living Dead. I'm Damon Martin.
And Happy New Year, everyone. It's me, Patrick Guerra.
And Patrick, we are officially kicking off the new year with our fresh first franchise of the year. We are going to be talking about Alien. Real quick, I got to say, did my intro do it justice? Because it was kind of long and I was kind of involved. It's like, did I go too deep on that one?
Damon, this movie needed an epic intro from the great writer Damon Martin. Of course it did. And yes, we are kicking off the new year with a new franchise. We haven't done a franchise. In fact, I don't think we even did one in 2023, a full franchise coverage. We are covering the Alien franchise. We're kicking it off right at the top of the year with Alien. Of course, Damon, Alien, one of my favorite films of all time, actually the favorite film of all time. My list has bounced around as much as I over the years as I could, but truth be told, now it's solidified. And after rewatching it not once but twice for this show, I am solid in the fact that Alien is indeed my favorite movie of all time ever. And to give you a few stats on that, other than the ones you did in this fantastic intro, Alien was released June 22nd, 1979. It stars Tom Skerritt as Dallas, Veronica Cartwright as Lambert, Harry Dean Stanton as Brett, John Hurt as Kane, Ian Holm as Ash, Yaphet Kotto as Parker, Bolaji Badejo as the Alien, and of course, Damon, the great Sigourney Weaver stars as our hero, Ripley. Written by one of our favorites, Dan O'Bannon, of course, from Return of the Living Dead fame, the reason we have the name of our show, and as you mentioned, Ronald Shusett, and directed, of course, by the great Ridley Scott. And I have a feeling, Damon, he became great because, boy, did he pull off a fucking movie called Alien.
This movie had so many, moving parts that came together and just made the perfect machine. When you really think about it, because this was Sigourney Weaver's second film ever. And really it was her first, it was her breakout role, of course, but it was really her second time she'd ever really been in front of a camera like this. And that's remarkable for the performance she gave and for what launched her career. Ridley Scott, of course, we know has gone on to do a million things, and the influences felt in this film from 2001 A Space Odyssey to Texas Chainsaw Massacre to The Shining. There's so many different, there's a lot of Stanley Kubrick in here. The influences are great, but then Alien went on to become one of the greatest influences in sci-fi history. Films for the last 30 plus years have tried to duplicate what Alien accomplished. The cast beyond Sigourney Weaver was incredible. Tom Skerritt, you mentioned all the names there. It is the perfect storm of science fiction and horror, and it stands it may stand atop the totem pole as the greatest science fiction horror film of all time. I'd have to really dig into the archives to see if I'm missing something, but I'd be hard pressed to find something better than this as far as blending science fiction and horror together. And I'm excited to do this franchise because I think we've well documented on this show, Alien is your favorite film of all time. And I love Alien, let me be clear about that. But Aliens, the sequel, the James Cameron sequel, might be one of my top 5 films ever. I adore that movie. Be clear, I adore Alien. It's a great movie. But Aliens, I actually saw Aliens before I saw Alien when I was a kid. I've loved Aliens forever. So we're going to do that next, and you'll get to hear me full-on-full-ate that movie. But this is such an, this is in my, I know this is more than one film. This is, multiple. We're doing 5 films here. Is that 5 films? Yeah,
6. We're doing 6 films.
6 films. So this is much more than a 2-film series. But I would argue, and I'm not trying to get too far off the subject here, Patrick, but I would argue that Alien and Aliens may be the greatest 1-2 punch in movie history. You know what I mean? I know this is not a trilogy, so you can't really compare it to, let's say, Star Wars or, other film. Just in terms of 2 films, Alien and Aliens may be the greatest 1-2 punch ever in films.
It really is. And the only other great 1-2 punch I can think of is also involves James Cameron, which is Terminator and Terminator 2. The difference is, I think, as much as I love both of those movies very much, they have a kind of a dated feel to them. They're kind of, and something I totally respect. Again, we're talking about all of our beloved children here. Damon and I are not going to choose between them, but the fit and finish of Alien and Aliens is, I think, unmatched. these are beautiful films, like beautifully made films. And I think for all the years when I just kind of like licked the screen as I watched Alien and Aliens, um, I didn't, like it took me a long time to kind of mature into why I like films on a much deeper level. But on the base level, Alien was perfect when I looked at it. I was like, there's nothing out of place here. And they're very simple techniques. Ridley Scott has a background in production design and art. He has an art degree. He specialized in production design. You know, another director who specialized in production design, Robert Eggers, doesn't really miss. So he's a guy that doesn't really miss, right? And it seems that he may have picked that up somewhere along the line from Ridley Scott, because Ridley Scott knew what to do with what he had. Now he claims that this was a budget of 8 million. It's officially, on different, it always fluctuates, but on most sites it says it hovers around 11 to 14 million. Ridley says it was 8 or 8.5. What he could do with $8.5 million looked like a Star Wars film. And there's no doubt that he took a lot of inspiration from Star Wars, which came out a few years prior, to go look at sci-fi in a way that it's so lived in. That was the thing about Star Wars that I think blew people's minds, because before that you had tons of sci-fi, but it was always super stark and sleek and clean. Like they just imagined this outer world that was so kind of perfect. And when Star Wars came around, well, Star Wars was anything but perfect. Everything in that world was dirty and well lived in. It was a well-established world, and a smart, very talented director like Ridley Scott goes, I can do that. I like that I resonate with. As a production designer, in his mind, he's going, yes, this world looks completely lived in. There's a long backstory without ever having to tell anything to anyone. The world tells you so much. And another movie a few years before Star Wars put a bug in his ear. That movie, Damon, a little something you called Texas Chainsaw Massacre. He sees this and he goes, now that I understand. And the coalescence of these two very good movies, by the way, Star Wars, the original Star Wars, and Texas Chainsaw, some of the best movies you'll ever watch. Ridley Scott goes, I see something here. Like I can do something with this. And then Dan O'Bannon's script finally comes his way after many directors pass on it, because Dan O'Bannon, we'll get to that in a moment here. Dan O'Bannon's script was kind of wild. It was kind of weird. And I think it took a weirdo to actually go, I can tackle that. And that was Ridley Scott. He said, we can do this. We can make this weird sci-fi movie. I'm going to make it feel super lived in. And I think he told one of the producers or someone, I can't remember who it was, but he goes, we're going to make this very, very, very simple, boiled down story. And we're going to make it look as good as 2001: A Space Odyssey, which was the gold standard of sci-fi films. And they went, I believe this guy. We believe Ridley Scott can do it. And Damon, they fucking did it. I mean, this movie, Damon, when you just look upon it, forget about what we're going to get into, all the emotional and socio commentary and all that stuff on this movie, but just on its face, it's a perfect movie.
Yeah, and you mentioned influences. We got to mention, I mentioned in the intro, of course, 2001: A Space Odyssey is definitely a huge influence on this movie. And Ridley Scott, again, you got to remember how this all came together. As I mentioned, I don't want to go back to the intro, but again, Ridley Scott was not the first choice. He was not, they had gone to a lot of different directors before.
Yeah, he was like number 6, I think.
Yeah, he was way down the list on people they were seeking out. Dan O'Bannon finding Ronald Shusett and working together. For those who don't know, Shusett went on, actually, they both had 2 different scripts that they were working on. And Shusett came up with a part of the original story for Alien, and he worked on it with Dan O'Bannon, and that's where the script came from. He went on his original script that he was working on at the same time that he went back 2 years later, ended up becoming Total Recall, another science fiction classic starring Arnold Schwarzenegger. So these are 2 titans of the filmmaking industry, the screenwriting industry, coming together. And just like I mentioned in the intro, Dan O'Bannon's first film was working with John frickin' Carpenter. So you talk about all the moving pieces to come together to this. And then, this film, and I mentioned it, but I want to say it again here, this film doesn't happen without Star Wars. If Star Wars doesn't come out in 1977 and become a massive global hit, Nobody was it. Fox passed on Alien. They had
Mhm.
the script, and Fox said, "Nah, we're not interested." Star Wars comes out, becomes a massive blockbuster, and they're like, "Oh, whoa, whoa, we need more sci-fi. Where's that Alien? Where's that Alien script?" And a year later, they greenlight it and give him the money, and they bring in Ridley Scott, and they make the freaking movie that comes out in 1979, so 2 years after Star Wars. Star Wars, if George Lucas and Star Wars doesn't happen, Alien does not exist. Like,
Right.
that's been clearly, Ridley Scott said that, everyone has said that. If that doesn't happen, Alien is not a film, which is insane to me considering how good this movie is. There were rewrites and script rewrites and changes, and I know Dan O'Bannon got angry at some of the changes they wanted to make to his original script, but there were a
Yeah.
lot of, and one of the biggest ones, which the way he wrote it said that it was, they were not like so to be clear, every character in the original script of Alien was, every crew member was male. But he actually wrote in the script, all characters are gender fluid, meaning they could be women or men. You don't have to write them as men, but every character was a man. It was only when Ridley Scott came on board, he's the one who decided Ripley should be a woman,
Yeah.
Lambert should be a woman. He's the one who made those changes. So again, these little things that make all the difference with this film, because if you just do it as is, the original script was different than what actually ends up on screen, which is, that's fairly common.
Yeah.
But the idea that the original script was all men, we don't get Sigourney Weaver if Ridley Scott is not the director who says, you know what, I want to add some women to this story, and I want to make a woman the lead. I want to make a female heroine. We don't get Sigourney Weaver, we don't get Ripley, one of the greatest iconic science fiction heroes of all time, if anyone else directs this movie.
Hmm.
I mean, it's the perfect storm to come together and even get this thing to happen, and then to actually go in and make it. And again, it's a labor of love because there's so many. Like, if you just go to the Wikipedia page, there's like 10 sections of what they had to do to make this movie. All the sets they had to build, the miniatures they built. The alien creature itself, designed by the artist H.R. Geiger, which is famously well known. Finding randomly running into in a London pub a 6'10" basketball player who is looking, and not an actor, not no one, they couldn't find him. They're like, you know what? This guy looks like he could fit in that alien costume we're talking about. So there is actually a person in the alien costume. It's a 6'10" guy they just randomly picked out of a pub in London. All these little things, like, it just sounds ridiculous. Like, this sounds like a movie about making a movie. Like, this sounds like something that you would see in Hollywood. Like, let's make a movie about making a movie, and there's all these real twists and turns and things that don't happen, and casting, and this is actually what happened to make Alien.
And this is, all the great movies have this story, I think, where it's like it gets passed to so many different hands. The story changes so dramatically. I mean, the history behind Star Wars and how dramatically that actually changed from script to screen. This is how it goes. I think it was like Seth Rogen said something like it's a miracle that any big movie ever gets made because of how many variables are in place. But when the variables come together, the right director, the right cast, which Ridley Scott calls this cast the greatest ensemble he's ever worked with. This is very early in his career. He's had a storied career, and he says the greatest ensemble I've ever worked with. He said that just a few years ago. The best cast, the best production designers. It all comes together to create what is really interestingly, Damon. This movie, for about the first 45 minutes, is a discovery movie. It is a movie about people who answer a distress signal, go to an alien planet, come across a vacant ship, so they think, come across what all they can tell is an alien life form. For the first 45 minutes of this movie, you don't have any sort of horror. What you have is dread. What you have is a sense and an atmosphere.
It's building. They're just building.
And it's like, it may be like one of my favorite slow burn movies of all time because it doesn't feel slow at all. Like, and I think why it doesn't feel slow is because of all the perfect little elements that are in line. The fact that your eyes can dart to any corner of the screen and see something amazing, and the sets were built like out of old aircraft parts. They would repurpose aircraft parts, paint them, invert them, change them a different way to just make them look, different. Things like, how about this, curved corridors? Dan O'Bannon claims that was his idea. Dan O'Bannon claims like he was looking at the set and said, "There's not enough curved corridors. Like, how are we going to be able to look around a corner? Curved corridors are expensive, right?" So they built those out. So the idea that you'd have blind corners to actually create a sense of horror.
Yeah.
So all the way through the first half of this movie, it's drenched in an atmosphere that is undeniably uncomfortable. The interactions between the crew members, I think it's 6 members, if I'm not mistaken.
Seven. It's 7 crew.
Is it 7?
Is it 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6? Yeah, 7. Yeah,
7 crew members.
7 crew members.
There's a class system on this ship. Parker and Brett, they're grunt workers. They're engineers. They work below decks. Then there's the science officers. Then there's the captains. There's a hierarchy right away, and it's over very it's over very simple dialogue where they're talking about their shares, right? Parker and Brett are kind of complaining that they're not getting full shares, and the captain just kind of dismisses them and goes, "You get the shares you agree to get." Well, they're clearly like, "Hey, we do more work, we deserve more money." Like there's that level of tension, which was like, it really stood out to me this time watching it. I was like, oh, they're developing that, like, nothing is quite comfortable here. There's a lot of sexual tension, which is really weird, and it's very, very, very subtle. But it was baked in. This movie, by the way, I think I texted this to you. They wanted to make this movie way more horny than it came out.
It's funny you say. It's funny you say. I was rewatching, so I've seen this movie a million times.
Yeah,
but I rewatched it right before. I rewatched it 2 nights ago, and then I rewatched parts of it right before we recorded. And I wanted to rewatch the chest burster scene, which I know we're going to talk about ad nauseum. But I want to mention, like, right before that, when they sit down to dinner and Kane is piling food onto his plate, and Parker says the horny line when he says, "I wish I was eating something else," looking right at Lambert, and she laughs, and I'm like, wow, they really were making this a super horny space movie.
Their intention, which I thought was so interesting, their intention was that anybody on this ship, the protocol for the ship was, you could have sex with anybody you wanted. That it was not a big deal to have sex with anybody I'm talking man, woman, man, woman. And Ridley Scott said, if I'd made this today, like, that would be very clear. But back then, you're talking 1979, that was a far off idea.
Yeah.
But it was baked into the script. It was baked into the idea that, like, all these people had probably had sex with each other multiple times because they've been out in deep space for years. So their interactions they're influenced by that. The fact that they've all probably had sex with each other at some point or another. Like later on in the script, when Dallas gets killed or taken by the alien, Lambert is like, she's a wreck because she's broken protocol, which is you don't fall in love with anybody on the ship. You can fuck anybody you want, but you don't fall in love with them. But she had fallen in love with Dallas, and apparently they even shot some scenes with her and Dallas that they never made it to the screen ever, not even in a director's cut or anything. But they decided that it was just taking away from what they were trying to do, which was kind of create this movie that just ratchets the tension slowly up, and by the end it basically becomes like a chase movie. There's a monster in the house. How do I get out before it eats me? Because I got no way to beat it. But like, forgive me if I'm all over the place, but it strikes me so crazy when I go back to Texas Chainsaw Massacre and how it influenced Ridley Scott. What do you and I say when we talk about Texas Chainsaw Massacre? Is that it feels very real. Yeah. It feels almost like a documentary. And I'm noticing, and I watched this twice. I managed to get 2 viewings in before we recorded this podcast, how real and authentic the interactions are on the ship. I don't feel like I'm watching actors. Nobody feels like they're acting. Everything feels raw. The arguments feel raw. when they blow up at each other, it feels like people really blowing up at each other, that they've been locked in a spaceship together for 10 years or however long it's been. You get that sense of realism, and it sort of gets right under your skin and it won't go away.
So let me backtrack two things I want to mention here. One thing I want to slightly disagree with you on that I actually really appreciate about this movie, and I know what you're saying, and I'm not saying you're wrong. I'm just disagreeing slightly, just in this sense. Because I looked at Alien through the lens of a movie fan. I also looked at it as we always talk about with that critical eye, but I also looked about it when it came out at the time in 1979. And a lot of times when we review older horror films, and we did this when we talked about The Exorcist and some other films we reviewed, The Omen, movies we reviewed from like the 70s, how those movies had a lot more patience and everything was kind of a slow burn. Some of it is out of necessity because, the alien in this movie, while it was a feat of, practical effects and engineering, it's still, they had to hide certain things and hide it in the
Oh,
shadows.
yeah.
It's still just a guy in a suit. You know what I mean? Ultimately, it is. So they had to make it look different and hide it in the shadows and all those little things, wet everything down and all those kind of things they had to do to make it look more real so you didn't see it's a guy in a suit. But one thing you said there that I actually appreciate that they didn't do was you said it's like, there's a lot of like the running from the alien. They actually don't really do that a lot in this movie because what they actually do is the scene where Ripley is trying to prepare the escape pod to get off the Nostromo. She's dropping down ladders and climbing through corridors and walking down hallways, and we never see the alien.
Mm-hmm.
Just the creeping sense of dread is there, that we know it could be there. That is the feat of genius of this movie, is that we only see the alien in very sparse moments. And when you say chasing the alien, what they actually don't do is there actually isn't a chase scene. There's not really a scene where the alien's marching after Ripley in the.
Well, I meant them chasing the alien because that's kind of what they start to do. They're trying to like corner it. That's what I meant.
And I love that they don't do that though. That they're just like you feel the tension that it could be around any corner, that it could come at you in any direction. But the fact that we're not getting these big drawn out action sequences where Ripley is running through the ship and climbing down. Now, obviously they do that in Aliens, but that was 8 years later, 7 years later. They had a lot more to work with at that point. And James Cameron, of course, is just a master of, of effects. And we've seen his, we saw what he did with Terminator, what he did with Aliens, and eventually with Terminator 2. He changed the effects game. Okay. We all know James Cameron did that. Certainly not saying Ridley Scott's not great. He is incredible, but I'm saying James Cameron just had something different to work with, and that was a totally different movie when he made it. Alien, that's part of the genius, though, is that we don't have these big extended chase sequences through the ship where it's like this alien's chasing Ripley and it's chasing Parker, and it's not that. I appreciate that. The other thing I want to mention that you talked about earlier with the slow burn of it, we don't get to the chest burster scene until like an hour in.
Yeah.
Now, I know I say this all the time, and people who listen to this podcast probably like, dude, you say this constantly, but I'm being honest. You cannot make Alien in 2023. Audiences will be bored out of their asses because, like, why isn't more happening 20 minutes into you have to have the chest burster scene 10 minutes into the movie. There's no patience for this in this day and age. Like, we need things to happen now. The fact that you have to get like an hour in to get to the kind of exciting incident where the alien actually appears, the real alien actually appears, is wild. It takes that long, but you never feel like it's that long. You never feel like they're just dragging time. From the moment they wake up on the ship and you realize that they're answering a distress call when they were on their way back home to Earth, and they answered this distress call, and the ship basically took them to this planet where they were supposed to answer a distress call, that's already ominous. Then you go down onto the planet's surface and the landing of the ship kind of crashes and everything kind of breaks and they're kind of freaking out. They might get stuck there. That's ominous. Then they get out of the ship and they go down into this weird other giant spaceship and they drop down in there and they see this alien creature with its chest burst open, but it's burst open from the inside out. And that's ominous. Kane drops down into the corridor and he sees this layer of fog covering these egg things, and that's ominous. Which, by the way, thank you to what's his name, Daltrey from the Who.
Yeah, it was his pyro guy or something.
It was his lasers from his show. They loaned it to Ridley Scott for this movie.
Yeah.
Um, he goes down there. See these eggs? That's ominous. Kane drops down to see him, and you shines the light, and you see the little movement inside, which, by the way, is Ridley Scott's hand. For those who don't know, that's actually Ridley Scott's hand inside the egg moving around. That's ominous. It flips open. Look down into it. That's ominous. The creature comes out, obviously big scare. All these moments are ominous and foreboding, and as you talk about the sense of dread, but really until the face hugger comes out, we don't really have we don't have any like action sequences. We don't have any big set moments of running or we're scared or any of this. And honestly, I think my favorite moment in Alien, to be honest with you, the moment when I was like, I love this movie, and this is like on my 10th rewatch somewhere, years ago, was when Kane and Lambert and Dallas are down in the alien ship. And they're talking they're finding this corridor and they're lowering Kane down into the column. He's looking at the eggs. And up in the ship, up in the Nostromo, Ripley says, Ash, I've decoded the message. It's not a distress signal. It's a warning. And he's like, yes. And he's like, I should go down and tell him. He's like, and for what for? Why? They're going to be back soon. Why bother? Why bother doing it? But her figuring out that it wasn't a distress signal, it was a warning to stay away. And then at the same time, Kane drops down in that chamber and you see those eggs. In my head, I'm like, oh shit, this is going to go bad. And obviously the whole premise of the movie is it's going bad, but that's where you realize they're in serious trouble. And I love that scene so much when she decodes the message, tells Ash, and he's like, oh, no. It's going to take too long to go out and tell them. Just, wait till they're back. And at the same time, Kane's dropping down there and finding those eggs. Shit is about to hit the fan.
Yeah. I mean, this time around, the idea of Ash being the agent provocateur of the bunch was so much more prominent. Now, obviously I've known for years, yeah, he's the bad guy, but seeing all the little seeds they plant along the way. And to me, that was the definitive scene where she goes, it's a warning. And he goes, what's the point? We're already there. It's not going to change anything. They're 6,000 meters away. We can't tell them it's a warning. It doesn't matter. They're already there. We'll tell them it's a warning when they get back. It's a foreshadowing of all the hell that is about to break loose. It's fantastic. I will disagree. I think modern audiences can deal with a slow burn like this, where you don't see the thing you came to see for about 45 minutes in the movie. It's that major studios and major IP won't do that anymore. Even the Alien franchise at this point wouldn't do that anymore. But as something brand new, which Alien totally was in 1979, I do think you can get away with it.
Well, I think it's more of the blockbuster model is what.
Yeah, that's what I mean. Established IP, you can't.
Yeah, the blockbuster model just doesn't work in this day and age to make this kind of a big budget movie. What would be a big, in 2023 would be a big budget movie.
Yeah, it's $100 million movie today.
Yeah, they wouldn't allow. They'd be like, hold on now, we gotta see this alien 20 minutes in. We can't wait 45 minutes. No, and so that's where I'm getting at. It's just again, the way films were made in those days and the patience that studios and filmmakers had, to me, was better than what we typically get today. And again, there are exceptions to the rule when you get you get a Martin Scorsese or a Quentin Tarantino who has carte blanche to do whatever the fuck they want, and you can get a 3.5 hour movie like Killers of the Flower Moon because the studio's like, you're Martin Scorsese, you can do whatever the fuck you want. And if you want to make a 3.5 hour epic, we're going to let you make a 3.5 hour epic. Edits, cuts, fuck no. You do whatever you want, buddy. Just roll out the Oscars. And Quentin's the same way. There's a few guys like that. I think, Denis Villeneuve has kind of done that with the Dune movies and his track record of making big.
Yeah, Dune 1 is basically just the 1.5 acts of Dune. It's not even like the full movie.
Yeah, and Dune, of course, is, and it's funny, Dune is the inspiration for Star Wars, because when you watch Dune, you realize how much Star Wars ripped off from Dune.
Oh my God, everything.
Yeah. I mean, and I guess that's all I'm getting at. It's I'm just saying, and I'm not even saying audiences necessarily. I just think that the studios, I guess is a better way to say it, they would just, in this day and age, they'd be like, hold on now, why aren't we seeing this alien pop out of that guy's chest 20 minutes in? That's no, we got to see it sooner.
I guess my point is original work is given that kind of grace. And
Sometimes.
so at the time, Alien and Star Wars, these were all things that were like brand new. You know, it was a sci-fi at a blockbuster. Even the blockbuster was new in the 70s. It was a new thing. It didn't come from blockbuster was a term that came out for Jaws. So it was just new territory.
That's
Yeah.
1975. That's 4 years before this.
Yeah. So, you know, it was all just new territory. And so, you know, the grace was given because it was completely new territory. They were just like, do whatever you want because we've never seen anything like this.
Yeah.
And then, Damon, you talk about, you know, this wonderful buildup that is all very simple, by the way, character development. I don't know anything about these characters, and that was apparently very intentional. Like, think about it. What do you know about any of them? What do you know about any of their histories? You don't. You just know their interactions in the moment. Like, it's so visceral. And I think Ridley Scott talked about this too. You know, there's so many like sci-fi taboos in this movie, which are like, oh, that's not how a spaceship works, or that's not how this would work, or that's not how that would work. And he goes, I had to say fuck it to all of that shit. And I had to go for the visceral. I chose visceral over factual. And guess what? It worked. Like, it totally worked. Like, I was listening to Tim Heidecker's podcast the other day, and he goes, there's a problem with like modern audiences. Now here we are, old guys bitching about modern stuff. Now it's my turn. Modern audiences insist on literality. Like, it needs to be literal. And I mean, sometimes we find ourselves doing it on this podcast, but we kind of forgive it. We kind of laugh it off. But modern audiences don't forgive things that need to literally happen. I'm sorry, that dinosaur would not look like that. It's like, we don't have dinosaurs. Like, dinosaurs don't exist anymore. So don't worry about it. It doesn't need to be literal. Let go.
It's like Neil deGrasse Tyson debunking sci-fi movies, which I do find
it's funny. Yeah.
But yeah, like sometimes you have to suspend disbelief and just like enjoy
the whole point.
Something.
Yeah.
It's a sci-fi movie.
Yeah, and Ridley was of this cloth that just said, like, go for the gut. Like, go for the gut. Don't worry about literal. Don't worry about like how gravity works on this thing. Don't worry about condensation and like all this other shit. Don't worry about it. I need you to feel it. And everything in this movie, from the environments to the acting to the violence, it's all visceral. Every last bit of it is visceral. It feels real. And I adore it. I adore it because I don't think we're going to be doing a lot of nowadays. I think nowadays we kind of have to be literal in our storytelling, or if you do go off the path, you need to be very good at setting up your world, which, by the way, Alien, very good at setting up its world.
It's hilarious you talk about the rain, because I had read a story with Ridley Scott where they talked about the scene where Brett goes down. He's looking for Jonesy. Yeah. And he stands underneath this thing, and the rain comes down on his face, and he lets it, drip into his mouth, and he's just kind of like enjoying it. And then the alien drops down and attacks him. And a producer or one of the studio people asked him, like, why the fuck is there rain in a ship? And he's like, I don't fucking know. It's condensation, whatever. It looks cool. Yeah. Like, that's what I wanted. I wanted like that reaction and seeing the alien all drop down all wet and gross and drop down and kill him. He's like, I don't care why it's raining in there. I love that. Like, he's just like, fuck it, it's condensation, whatever. I don't care.
Yeah. He said, he goes, there's a malfunction and there's condensation in the room. And they go, well, the chains that are swinging wouldn't do that. And he goes, shut the fuck up. The reason the chains are swinging, he goes, is the room looks too static. Again, production design. He understood the production design of the room and went, the room looks too stark and I need something in it to break it up. So he has those chains swinging, and then you hear the little clink of the chains. That adds to that classic dread, like very classic horror, very Hammer House horror. This idea of just chains rattling, but it does something else. And I'm sure he's talked about it somewhere. But the design of this ship, once the alien is revealed, and I think we'll start really getting into that in a minute here, but once the alien's revealed and you finally see its form when it attacks Brett in that boiler room. The design of the ship makes you never trust the ship again, because the alien kind of looks like the ship. And the first sign of it is those chains that are swinging, because the tail comes down and it mimics the chains. So
Yeah.
you were seeing chains in the room, and then all of a sudden that tail comes down, and all of a sudden this form comes down, and you see it, and it's long and it's sleek, and it feels like some of the walls and some of the piping. All of a sudden, like, you can't trust it. You're in a jungle, and the predator that's after you is perfectly designed to blend into that jungle. So from that point on, from the death of Brett, you can never trust the ship. The ship becomes part of the problem. It's fucking brilliant. Like, that is such a fucking brilliant move. It struck me so hard. I was like, God damn, like every corner looks like the alien. You don't know if you're seeing it or not. So fucking good.
Well, I think that also speaks to what I was talking about earlier, where there's no big extended chase sequences, because it's just as they're going through the ship trying to escape, or going through the ship looking for the alien. There's no Dallas running from the alien. There's no Ripley running from the alien. It's because, well, obviously, again, as I mentioned, they couldn't do that for, the look of the alien. They couldn't just have that, a 6'10" dude running through the ship. It would look really bad. But the fact that you could look around every corner and you see the alien because the way the ship's designed, that made it dreadful. That made it suspenseful, without having to have these big extended 3-minute chase sequences through a ship where Ripley discovers the alien and then is chasing her through corridors and she's dumping down ladders and here comes the alien and oh my God, like that's what a modern sci-fi movie does, and it can be done well. I mean, absolutely.
Oh yeah.
Well, but I appreciate the simplicity of this, that there are no chase scenes like that in this movie. And that's because, as you talked about, that the alien could be anywhere. Just like when she gets into that escape pod, and that's the ultimate moment of like the alien escaping into the background, is when she's in the ship getting ready to take off, and then the alien's arm pops out and she's like, oh shit, it's in here with me. She didn't notice it. No one noticed it.
No. Can you imagine what that scare was like in 1979?
Yeah, I mean, unbelievable. So we got to talk about this, because this is the most iconic scene in the entire movie, and that is the chest burster scene. I mean,
Yeah.
Before we get there, I do want to compliment the simplicity and originality of the face hugger, because that is something totally different and totally new, because that whole thing came from trying to create a device of how does the alien get on the ship. And Dan O'Bannon and is it Richard Suzette or Ronald Suzette? I'm forgetting his name. Is it
I'm looking at it right. Yeah,
Ronald Suzette. Ronald Suzette was the one who said, "What if we impregnate one of the crew members, and that's how it gets on board?" And they're like, "Oh shit, that's pretty good." Because they were trying to figure out, how do we get this alien on the ship? They land on this alien planet. They discover the ship, they discover the eggs, all that stuff, but they didn't know how to get the alien on board without it just being an alien climbing on a ship. And that's where Ronald Shusett came up with the idea, what if we what if we have it it infects one of the crew members? And then, of course, it evolves into the face hugger, and they bring it on the ship. And by the way, the effects and designs are genius. The scene where, Ash and Dallas try to remove it. It tightens its grip around Kane's neck, and then when they cut it, of course, the acid pops out, and they're like, it's going to eat through the goddamn hole. And they're running around checking, they find it's got acid for blood, all that. And then the alien just disappears. It comes off his face and dies, falls on Ripley, freaks her out, but then they touch it. Very visceral, very real. Looks real. They touch it, it kind of twitches, whatever, and Ash, she's like, it's okay, it's dead. They go to dinner, everything seems all right. They're like, good, we're going to go in the freeze. He's like, I got to get something to eat first. Can I get something to eat before we go in the freeze? Like, no problem, I'm buying. They sit down to dinner, and everything's cool. Everything's fine. They're even making sex jokes, as I made earlier. He's like, I wish I was eating something else. And Lambert's like, ha, ha, ha. Like, you want to get something before dinner?
Before cryo?
Yeah, before cryo? And also, well, one thing what's hilarious? I've seen this movie 24 times. You know what number I never picked up on before this viewing this last time was when they were talking about her calculation to get home. She actually says it takes 10 months to get back to Earth. I never caught that before. I never caught her saying 10 months. I don't know if I just missed it or I just glazed over me, But I
Yeah.
watched it this time. I noticed she said it takes 10 months to get back to Earth. Anyways, they're at dinner. They're eating this weird salad, looking weird shit. And, they're all there. And then Kane starts like coughing. And I love Yaphet Kotto, the late, great Yaphet Kotto. We lost him last year. Or is it earlier this year? Last year, I'm sorry, 2 years ago. I can't remember how long ago it was, but Parker sits there and he goes, "It ain't that bad, baby." And then he starts spitting up and falls over and starts twitching and screaming bloody murder. And what I love about this scene, yes, they had to shoot at multiple angles. John Hurt was partially under the table. They had a double, all this kind of stuff. But the one thing that is well documented, the cast, Sigourney Weaver, Yaphet Kotto, all the Harry Dean Stanton, all of them, they had no idea what was actually going to happen. They knew an alien was going to.
It's not true. It's not true.
I read it in multiple places.
It's one of the greatest myths of this. And I was listening to the commentary with the crew. It is the greatest myth is that they had no idea what was going to come out of his chest. That's not true.
They didn't know they knew how it was going to come out of his chest. That it was.
They knew it was going to burst out of him. They knew that's what they didn't know, and I think what happened was a game of telephone over the years. What they didn't know, and what they actually filmed, because this is the legend goes as you're saying, they didn't know what was going to happen, and the reactions you see are real. I've heard that my whole life, and I heard it from the actors directly in the commentary. They knew it was going to burst out of his chest. They were quite aware. What they didn't know is where the blood was going to go. And they were actually told, the blood's just going to kind of pool up around him. That's what the effects people actually hid from them, is that the blood was going to spray the fuck out of them.
And it blasts Veronica Cartwright, Lambert.
And her reaction is, oh shit, a bunch of blood just hit my face.
Yeah. And because she gets blasted with blood. And that's like where it's like, and she's like, oh, and like that is the real reaction. That's what I was getting at, is like they're freaking out when the blood explodes all over them. But that scene is so insane when the chest just explodes the first time and this big burst of blood comes out from the bottom. And you hear, and Kane is freaking out and convulsing, and oh, it's just wild. And then another punch, and then it comes out. It is the wildest transformation and introduction of a creature ever in film history. Yeah. It's genius. It is the most genius way to introduce an alien or any kind of like villainous creature that has ever been created in film history, in my opinion.
There's no contest, Damon. And I'm gonna ask you this now. You and I both saw Aliens before we ever saw Alien.
Right.
But you and I guarantee you, Damon, when you were a kid, you knew about the chestburster scene.
I did.
Everybody knew about it. It wasn't just like film lore, because when I'm 6 or 7, like I didn't know there was even film lore, right? But I knew that an alien blew out of this guy's chest. I'd seen the scene myself somewhere, somehow, at a very young age. My kids like can't handle that level of gore, and like it's just burned into my brain since I'm a little child. Like it's one of the most iconic scenes in film history, and it's a horror scene. Like that's what I love. Like one of the most iconic film scenes ever. Top 5 minimum. Is an alien exploding from a man's chest, covered in blood, covered in gore, leaving his friends and crew members just in utter shock, and kicking off the second half of this most treacherous horror film. But like you're right, like has it ever been better? And like I love the little thing. It's like, it's animatronic, but it still looks so organic. It looks like a big fucking dick. Let's be honest. Like Geiger was not subtle. He was a very sexual artist.
Very phallic.
Very phallic. Lots of fallacies. Even when they enter the ship, there's sort of a vaginal opening out of everything. Like he's a very organic artist in that respect. Like it's a big, bloody, throbbing, silver-toothed cock, Damon. There's like no other way around it. Like, excuse my language, folks at home. If you've listened for a long time, you know how I talk. Like, it's like, holy shit. Like, it's not just like, oh, that's crazy. It's like, this might be the craziest thing you've ever seen.
Then it stares up at them and goes,
yeah, and it roars at them, and then it skitters off the table, and it just leaves them there in shock.
Can I tell you my journey to this scene real quick? I have to tell this story because Aliens comes out in 86. I don't remember when I saw Aliens, but I know it wasn't when this came. I know it wasn't when it came out.
Right.
It had to be a few years later because here's my journey to the chestburster scene. Not only had I seen Aliens before I saw Aliens, but I also saw a little film by the name of Spaceballs before I
Yeah.
saw Alien.
Yeah.
And in that film, you've seen Spaceballs, the great
Mel Brooks.
Mel Brooks, thank you. He parodied Star Wars mostly, but there was a great Alien homage towards the end of the movie when Lone Star and Barf go sit at a diner, and John Hurt is there. And he's eating the special, and he starts coughing up, and he slits down, and he's like, what he says, the guy says, somebody get this guy some Pepto-Bismol.
Yeah.
And he goes, boom, 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 and the alien bursts out, and John Hurt goes, not again.
Not again.
And it comes out, and then it grabs the hat, and the king goes, hello, my baby.
Yeah.
Honey, hello, my ragtime cat. And then skitters off, and everyone's like, what the fuck? That was my first time seeing the chest burster scene was in Spaceballs when I was a kid, because that was like 89, I think, when Spaceballs came out.
Yeah.
I saw Aliens, then I understood it better, and then I saw Alien, and then I really understood. So I actually saw Spaceballs first and had no context what it was. I thought it was like, I was like, what the fuck is this? Even as a kid, I was like, what is this? And then I saw Aliens. So I saw Aliens and I understood it, but then I saw Alien and I really understood it. So my journey actually went through Spaceballs is how I saw the chest burster scene for the first time.
I don't know how or when. I don't remember the first time ever seeing the chest burster scene. I definitely remember the Spaceballs version, but I knew what it was referencing when I saw it. So I'd seen it somewhere. Again, my older brother was big into horror, so I'm sure it was on the TV at one point and I watched it. Yeah. I just don't remember the exact moment that it happened. But I remember somehow getting a hold of like a behind the scenes to Alien, which was really weird. Like, I don't know if we had it. I don't know where it came from, but like, I used to watch the making of Alien a lot, maybe even more than I ever watched the movie. We just had it. I don't know why we had it, or it was on HBO or something. I'm not sure. So I would pour over that, and that scene is just so fucking crazy, dude. It's still to this day just so crazy because of how well it was pulled off. And by the way, I think they only shot one take of it, and it only took them the morning to shoot. You know, you would imagine normally for something that complicated and something that's put together in such an iconic way that it took them 3 days to get it right. They did it in one take in the morning.
Yeah, and the whole inspiration for the chest burster scene was one of the writers, it was Dan O'Bannon or Ronald Shusett, had a condition. Was it shingle? No, not shingles. What was the condition they had? They had a condition where it made it feel like they were burning on the inside. Something was trying to get out of them. I can't remember what the condition was. It's like an actual condition. But that's what gave them the inspiration for the alien popping out inside the human, popping out to the outside. It was whatever their condition is, like some sort of indigestion. They always felt like their insides were trying to pop out. And that's what gave them the inspiration for an alien literally popping out of this dude's chest. And one of my favorite moments of that scene, while it is so like mind-blowing, like it is just, again, so calm, cool, and collected. Kane is back. He's okay. The face hugger dropped off him. He seems fine. They're going to go back in the deep freeze and go home to Earth. And then he starts choking and he spits and he falls over and convulses. And then when the alien pops out, one of my favorite little like moments in this is when the alien comes out and it's looking around. Here's this giant, cock with silver teeth. And it's looking around everyone. And in the background, you see John Hurt. His fingers are twitching. Yeah. He's still kind of alive, and he's just dying. It's like his death rattle.
Yeah.
I love that little detail in there where he's just like, his fingers are flittering as the alien is sucking the last little bit of life out of this poor guy. And then it runs off, and everyone's like, the best look, by the way, obviously Veronica Cartwright as Lambert, when she gets absolutely doused with blood, and she's like, oh God, that's pretty good. Sigourney Weaver's reaction's pretty good, but the best reaction of all is Ian Holm as Ash, when his eyes are just wide, and he's like, he just watches it run away, and he's like,
well, I didn't think it was going to go that poorly. I actually love Brett's reaction, which is, oh God, why am I not thinking of his name right now? I just said Harry Dean Stanton. he's the only one, if you notice, who is like almost nonplus. Like he's just casually watching it. He could have a cigarette hanging out of his mouth while he watches it. And he explained in the commentary that he goes, guys, I'm a good actor. I can do a lot of things. One thing I can't do is terrified. I don't know how to do it. I just can't do it. So in that moment, I didn't play it that way.
Yeah.
And I was like, that's so funny, but it weirdly informed the character. You're like looking around all these terrified crew members, and then there's one that's just kind of staring. You're like, he's seen some shit. Like something in his life has certainly like got him to the point where this is not a big deal.
And then Parker grabs a spork and he's ready to stab the thing, and Ash is like, "Don't touch it, don't touch it!" And then it runs off, and then Ash does the. But it's just like Parker's like, let's kill it. Like,
Yeah.
It's just that is like, we talk about this being the perfect movie. That is the perfect scene. Like that.
Yeah.
I've seen that scene I feel like 1,000 times. I've watched it separately from the movie itself. Just watched it on YouTube or when it's popped up on cable or whatever it is. And it never gets old. Every single time I watch it, I pick up something new that I didn't see before that I enjoy. Like I said, I've seen this movie 24 times. I just picked up on the ultra horniness of that scene when Parker's like, I wish I was eating something else, looking right at Lambert. She's like, ha 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 ha. Like, you're like, oh Jesus. Like, you're just full on like, you want to get some right now, baby?
Have you ever? Oh, what's that?
I was gonna say, I didn't really pick up on that till just recently.
Have you ever seen the documentary Memory?
No, I know, because I know that was the original movie that was Dan O'Bannon was writing.
Yeah, and Dan O'Bannon, I mean, we talk about any little element in this movie, Dan O'Bannon takes credit for all of it, except for the Ash storyline, which he complained about and actually hated. But Memory is a great documentary on the original script, and it's on Shudder right now, I think. Hey, Shudder.
Yeah, I know what you're talking about. Yeah. Hey, Shudder.
Yeah, it's a pretty interesting documentary, and I bring that up because you talk about how horny that this crew tends to be. This movie was supposed to be way, way, way more sexual, way more, and the studio kind of pulled all that stuff out of it, much to Dan O'Bannon's chagrin. Like he fancied himself. He wanted to be the director of the movie. Ultimately, I think it would have been a very different movie.
I can't imagine Dan O'Bannon being that sexualized when I see Return of the Living Dead and you see Trash just jump up on a gravesite, strip down naked, and dance in the rain. I can't imagine to be the same thing here.
I think it would have been a completely different movie. We might not even be talking about it right now. But truth be told, like it was a very sexual movie. And there were things like some really disturbing things. So the original way Lambert dies. Now they sort of imply it a little bit in her death scene that you see the tail come up between her legs. By the way, that's not her legs. That's Harry Dean Stanton's legs. That's not even her pants. They just repurposed a scene from him. That happened to him. The implication was the alien didn't just take Brett. He violated Brett, took him, and did stuff. The alien, it's not a coincidence that when it opens its mouth, this like other mouth comes out of it that looks very fistual, if you will. This movie was about rape, which is really weird. Like the Dan O'Bannon version of it was just about violation. And the original Lambert scene, he doesn't kill Lambert. The alien doesn't kill Lambert. He assaults her and she dies of a heart attack, which is fucking dark as shit.
Yeah.
Like really dark. Like she doesn't die from the alien attack. The alien violates her. She crawls away and dies in a locker. That's how she originally died. And I was like, I'm really glad they didn't do that. Like, that's fucking awful. That's how this movie was supposed to go the whole way down the line. We'll get into the fourth act here in a minute, but, you know, very famously, the end of this movie is Sigourney Weaver stripping down to underwear and getting into the spacesuit. It all felt like, I think everybody was like, this is oddly sexual because it was supposed to be. Yeah. The alien was supposed to actually stalk her down and like get turned on by looking at her and like and try to like be with her. Like there was so much of this movie was supposed to be about sexual violation, and I'm really glad that they they ironed a lot of that out.
Is that what inspired Species then, I imagine? Because I just watched Species again recently and I love that movie. Natasha Henstridge,
Yeah.
Michael Madsen, that is the horny alien story. That is the story of the alien basically boning everyone and wanting to bone everyone. Apparently they got the inspiration from that because that's what that movie is literally an alien screwing everybody.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, that's what it was supposed to be in this movie too. So it's like you're like, geez, that's crazy that they were going to go that hard with it. But some of those elements still exist. Obviously, the design. I think the design of the alien is very phallic, and that's totally done on purpose. And when in Dan O'Bannon's mind, it was an all male crew. That whole male crew was going to be violated originally. That's how that was supposed to go. So yeah, a couple of producer and studio notes changed a lot of that stuff.
And I'm the writer here. Like I always like to do a deep dive on the story itself. Now I'm a little sad I didn't know all those details because I haven't seen that documentary, and I'm going to run and go watch it. But I will say this, and because again, one of the reasons why Quentin Tarantino is my favorite filmmaker is because he's a great writer and director, and Tarantino always has a very singular vision of what he wants in his movies. And while he does edit his movies, like I've read the original screenplay to Django Unchained. And in Django Unchained, not to get too far off the subject here, we all know the scene where Dr. King Schultz and Django go up to the room and they meet Calvin Candy for the first time and they're talking about the Mandingo fighting. There's a scene that he wrote earlier than that where you see Calvin Candy getting and winning Django's wife, Broomhilda, in a card game, and it's a very weird, like not weird. It's just a very like visceral, like just a very like dark scene of him winning a slave basically in a card game, and it's in the script. But ultimately, Tarantino felt like it didn't fit, didn't need to be in there, and they just left it out. And when you read any of Tarantino's scripts, you can tell there's a lot of stuff he ends up leaving out. But it's his vision, so he's the one who's deciding what comes and what goes. And I appreciate that about him because he has a vision for what he wants. Now, I understand films have to be cut down. Not everything's going to end up on some stuff's going to end up on the cutting room floor. A 3-hour movie has to get cut down to 2.5 hours. All those things, I totally understand that. This is one of those times where I'm glad there was intervention, not only for that stuff you're talking about, but like the Ash idea. Like, Ash being revealed as a cyborg, as a humanoid, like a robot, and I know Dan O'Bannon hated that. Like he's like, why the fuck does he need to be a robot? Like what the fuck? That is one of the best parts of the movie. The big reveal that Ash is a robot and he was basically on orders to retain the alien and fuck everybody else. There's literally when Ripley goes in and finds the order from Mother and it says crew expendable, basically fuck everyone, save the alien. So now you understand why Ash let in Kane when the quarantine said he should have to stay outside for 24 hours, which obviously would have prevented the alien from ever getting in the ship in the first place, quarantining him, all that kind of stuff. When the alien pops out of his chest, not trying to kill it. This was Ash protecting the company's most valuable asset. And him being a robot made it that much better because you do at that point cut off all morality. You cut off all question of right or wrong. He is a robot who is just answering an order. You know what I mean? Like when you press a button on your computer, it turns on. The computer doesn't start talking to you and saying, do I really want to turn on or am I kind of tired right now and I don't feel like doing this? It's a computer. It just turns on because you press a button. That's what Ash is. He's a computer who listens and follows orders. He just happens to be a lot more humanoid about it. But the fact that he was a robot, that big reveal, is unbelievable. And the film doesn't play the same if it's not that. Like, it totally plays different if you just realize that he's just some asshole following bad orders and he doesn't have any morality or any connection to this crew he's been serving with or whatever. The fact that he's an android answers every question you could ever have about the decisions he's been making this entire time. And that reveal is so iconic. It's right up there. It's like second in my mind to the chest burster scene. Well, maybe third because the face hugger is pretty shocking too.
Yeah.
But the revelation that Ash is an android is like, I mean, it's a great reveal. So like, as much as I always advocate for a writer's vision, this is one time where I'm like, I'm glad Ridley Scott made this change because to me, Ash is one of the best parts of this movie.
Yeah, I believe it was Walter Hill that actually added Ash to the movie.
And
Dan O'Bannon.
And Walter Hill, for people who don't know, is an incredible director. He did Warriors. He's done a billion movies. He's still
Yeah.
directing movies to this day. He's been out there forever. I know Tarantino loves Walter Hill. Walter Hill was the producer on this movie. He's done a million things. So look up Walter Hill. You'll recognize a lot of his work.
Yeah, highly influential on this film. And Dan O'Bannon straight up hated the idea of Ash. Ash was not in the script. It was not a character that existed. But I think you're right. I think it was completely crucial to this movie. It created the sin because a lot of horror films are predicated on the sin. And what was the sin? Well, the sin here was greed. This company wanted this thing for their weapons division, and they were willing to sacrifice anybody to get it. And that created this whole other level of conflict, and this fact that like nobody was going to come for them. No one was coming to help them. So they had to act. It was after, the Ash reveal and the breakdown and everything that they finally decide, let's just fucking blow up the ship. Enough. Let's get into the escape pod, blow this ship to high hell. Let's get the fuck out of here. It really is what kicks off the final sequence of the movie, is that reveal. The fact that like no one's coming for them. They were completely tools in this process, in this company's process. And Ash, as a character, is revolutionary. I think it might be the first time that AI had really been done that way. Obviously, you had HAL 9000 in 2001: A Space Odyssey, but the AI or the living android that Ash is so much more reflective of what actual AI is today.
Yeah, how scary.
It really is, because Ash has emotion. Ash isn't just, he's not super cold, but there's these little hints, right? There's little things like when they're arguing about going to answer the distress signal, Parker's like, that's not my job. That's not my job description. And Ash could recite the contract by heart in his head robotically, because if you type into Chat GPT, what's our contract say about distress calls? Well, it says that if you ignore a distress call, you forfeit your entire share. Like he's being an AI. Like he can compute all that shit in his head. But what the scary version of him is that he's AI completely unchained, and he's got emotion, but it's emotion that is like, don't get in the way of the thing I need to do, or you will make me mad.
Yeah.
And then there's the Dan O'Bannon side of it, which is the horny side. So there's a scene that always, Damon, and correct me if it didn't puzzle you when you were young, when Ash rolls up the nudie mag and tries to stuff it in her face. Were you not confused when you saw that as a kid?
Yeah.
Like, what is he doing exactly other than trying to choke her? Because there's an answer. I'm just curious he's
holding her down, and then he very deliberately, after he kind of knocks her out, he very deliberately, like, slowly winds up this magazine, and then he climbs over top of her and starts jamming it down her throat. And my thought was, in that moment, I was like, that's a weird fucking way to choose to kill somebody.
Yeah.
Like that? Like, you could just choke her to death or stab her or bludgeon her, but putting a magazine, when I saw it, I was like, wow, that's a weird choice to make.
So it always baffled me. Like, to this day, it baffled me. But I got my answer, and it's not pretty. So their thought process was, well, this AI is highly emotional in its own sense. It's kind of a runaway AI, and it has desire, just like any other human would. And they said it. I think Ridley Scott says it's like 30% human. So like there's like human part of him, not unlike the replicants in Blade Runner. So he's got a little bit of human in him too. But what he doesn't have are human parts, if you know what I mean. Even though I said silver-toothed cock earlier, he doesn't have a dick. And so in that moment, he was violating her, because he didn't have a phallus to violate her with.
He's a Ken doll.
He's totally a Ken doll. So he rolls that thing up and he does that to her.
Yeah.
So that scene now disturbs the fuck out of me in a whole new way.
Yeah.
Because that was fully their intent in that as they designed it, it was puzzling to me for 30 years. And now I'm like, oh, that's why he did it. That's fucked up. That's fucking dark.
If you people, because I imagine that, I mean, obviously anyone who's going to listen to this podcast is going to have seen Alien. It's, 40 years old at this point, but
nearing 50.
Yeah, go back and watch Alien again and start picking up on all the sexual references, because even though I've seen this movie 24 times, I picked up on more this last time because I did the whole critical eye thing where I was like, let me just pay a little closer attention to the dialogue, to the story, little intricacies here and there that I just, again, it's just an enjoyable movie. It became like a comfort movie. I could put it on the background and watch it, and I didn't need to listen and watch every single second. Like, I could check my phone for a text message and go right back into the movie and feel like I didn't miss anything because I've seen it 24 times. But I just sat down there and watched it this time from start to finish without any interruptions, anything like that. And I started picking up on the little things that I just never noticed, namely, as I mentioned a couple times, the Parker scene with Lambert. But when you watch this film from that, like, I don't want to turn this into like an erotic podcast, but like, you realize how much like underlying sexual tension there is in this movie. It's really odd when you start really examining this movie. And like, because you texted me as you're watching this and you were doing the commentary and you're like, man, they really wanted to make this a horny movie.
It was supposed to be way hornier.
Yeah, it's just funny that they did. Now, there is, years ago, when Alien was released in 1979, it was a blockbuster, made a lot of money, and at the time, critics were kind of mixed on this movie. There were not a lot of positive reviews, Siskel and Ebert were kind of mid. Siskel called it a haunted house movie just set on a spaceship, and they were all... Now, everyone re-examined this one. This is one of those films that got re-examined years later, and people started to appreciate it more. And I think it was it 2003? They released a director's cut into theaters. Ridley Scott went back in, recut the movie, but it's a different director's cut than what you would traditionally think of it. When you think of a director's cut, you think of, to go back to Star Wars, you think about what George Lucas did, where he just kept changing shit. Like, he just kept adding in weird things and, just kept messing with the original. And me personally, I just the 1977 Star Wars was perfect. Stop messing with it. Or you think of 30 minutes of extra footage being just chunked in there,
right.
Extra scenes just being thrown in there. The director's cut for Alien is much different. And I want to allow you to turn the table over to you to talk about the differences between Alien and Alien, the director's cut, but also how different it is from a traditional quote unquote director's cut.
Yeah. Well, first of all, it's shorter than the original movie by a minute, I think, right? I think you were
one minute shorter than the original theatrical version.
Yeah. You had the exact number, and that's funny. It's like I was sitting there watching the director's cut. I watched it first because, again, this is a movie I know back and forth, so I didn't need to like pine over it in the way I normally do. First, I watched it with the commentary, the standard theatrical cut, and then I sat and watched the director's cut, no commentary, and I thought to myself, this movie feels almost the same. It was like cuts were tighter, things were sharper. Like, it was just shit like that, little things. But there are elements, there are new things, but they're so. How would I put it? Like, they're almost like just a little extra texture on some of the story beats that are so subtle you don't even notice it's a director's cut. There's one very obvious one. We'll talk about it at the end. But so I'll rifle off a few. One, they talk about the signal and the planet, and there's a moment where Lambert's sitting there and they're like analyzing the planet. And really the biggest thing I got out of that was they asked about the gravitational field, and she said it was like 0.86, I think, implying it was 0.86 the gravity of Earth. And the one thing I picked up from that little scene that they left in was Ash going, "Oh, you could walk on it." Ash is pushing them to go. He's saying, "It's walkable. Let's go. You can go. We can go research it." And that's the only little thing I really pulled from that scene where I was like, "Oh, that's critical." Was Ash saying that little line, and that's it, and the scene's done. I mean, the scene was 30 seconds. There was another weird little tiny second, which was when Kane is down there in the with all the eggs. He had a gun with him, and he just puts the gun away before he goes to look in the thing. I mean, it's a split. I mean, it's 5 seconds, if anything. So those are small ones. Here's one that I loved. So there's that great argument where they don't want to let Kane back in because he's got the face hugger on him, and Ripley's like, absolutely not. You guys have to stay out, and then Ash overrides her. Well, when they're finally back in, and Kane's in the medical bay, and they're kind of going, why don't you just freeze him? They're like kind of screaming about that. Lambert comes charging up and slaps the shit out of Ripley. I mean, fucking like just decks her with a slap, and they start to get into a fight, and they break that up. And I was like, why'd you do that? Like, why did they cut that out? This is so great. Like, it just felt like it needed to be in the movie. Brett's death is a little more drawn out, and then there's a great puddle of like raining red blood where Parker stands, and it kind of rains on him and leaves this puddle of blood. It's a small one. The big one, and this is one that I had been waiting for my whole life, because I told you earlier I watched the behind the scenes, the making of Alien, my whole life, and I was waiting to see when she's finally trying to get out, and she has to go get Jonesy. Which, by the way, another little cutscene, just a split second, the alien actually dips its head down and looks into the box at Jonesy. She goes to get Jonesy, and she goes down this one level, and she finds Dallas still alive, cocooned up, and Brett is off on the other side, and his corpse is kind of like glued up to the wall with all that great alien design that, you know, it's made like a little den or a little nest in there. And Dallas is moaning in pain, and he just asks her to kill him. And she hits him with the flamethrower and lights up the room with flames, and then she runs off, and then the rest of the movie is how you would remember it. And that big scene, that big chunk, they had it fantastically restored. I think it was 2005. The weirdest thing was, I don't think that I needed that scene. Well, did you get to watch that scene fully restored in the cut?
I did. I rewatched that scene because when I did research on the director's cut, because when we get to Aliens, which is like my Alien, there is a director's cut of that movie, and there is a lot more in the director's cut of Aliens, and I actually prefer the director's cut to the theatrical version. Honestly, if I'm being honest. This one I looked up for because you told me you were watching the director's cut, and I kind of forgot there was one. So I went and looked it up because I was like, oh, let me see what the differences are so I could just look up those scenes if I don't have time to watch it. Because I was already watched the movie at that point. I wanted to just have time to make sure I could watch those scenes. And then I did the research and I was like, hold on, there's really not that, like, it's just little cuts. Like, it's not, you know, there's this scene where Ripley tells Ash, well, I have access to Mother now. And like, there's like where she pulls out the little card and puts it back in and goes, no, they just cut out the card scene. Like, it's just her going in the door, like little tiny cuts that he takes.
Small stuff. Like, it was Lambert's reaction off her saying that. That was like, it was just minimal.
Little things that got edited out, but that was the big one, was the cocoon scene. And so I went and watched it. It's about 4 minutes long, 4.5 minutes long. It is cool. It is cool to see, because when you see Aliens and you see all the people cocooned in Aliens, it makes sense why that happens, and it makes a lot more sense why it happens based on that missing scene. And Dallas literally moaning, saying, kill me, and then, you know, she lights him up. It is cool, but I would agree, I don't think it's really necessary. I mean, you kind of already get the point that they're dead. And what I like better, and again, not to get into the aliens conversation, when you get into Aliens and you realize that these aliens are creating more aliens when they're nesting them, and there's a queen alien like creating these eggs, and the eggs are, you know, putting out more face huggers. The face huggers are attacking the people in the cocoons, who will eventually birth more aliens. Like, that's what the cocoons are for. It does, if you watch Aliens and see what the purpose of it is, and then you go back and watch Alien, you'd be like, what's one alien? Is this a queen? Is it birthing eggs? Is that, because you're cocooning it for no real reason at that point? You know what I mean? So The story makes more sense in Aliens to do it. So this one didn't make as much sense based on what we know happened 7 years later. So in this regard, yeah, I would agree. I don't really need it. It's a cool scene because you get to see Dallas one last time, because when Dallas dies, when he's climbing through the air ducts and the alien just pops out, you see the hands pop out in the face, and then, you know, he's just dead. That's the last you see of Dallas in the movie. Revisiting that even momentarily where he's like, kill me, it is kind of cool, but I would agree it's not totally necessary.
It didn't add anything to the film.
No, it's a
I
cool
think
scene. It's a cool scene, but
it's a
yeah.
cool scene, but it doesn't add anything. What I loved about the original version, which is without that scene in it, is when the great air duct scene where the alien reaches out to him and then everything goes to black. Is the next thing is his flamethrower drops on the table and Parker just goes, "No blood, no Dallas."
Yeah.
Scary. That's scary all in itself. I love that, and it's stuck with me throughout the years. No blood, no Dallas. Like it's just like, okay, well, what the fuck happened to him? This thing ran off with him. What is it going to do? Like the unknown of that. And I think they say somewhere in the commentary, our minds come up with so much more nastiness than you could ever actually create. But the idea that it just took him and you'll never know what he did with him is fucking scary.
All of the death scenes in this movie are kind of mysterious in a way. Like even
Yeah.
like when he grabs Brett. And when you see him, like the closest that we get really to like a close up death scene is Parker, when Parker's like
Yeah.
literally battling the alien and trying to get Lambert out of there, and she dies too. Like that's the closest we see like to an actual death. You know what I mean? Like where Parker's right up close to the alien, and you see the mouth come out and everything. Outside of that, everything else is kind of you just see the alien, you hear the scream, and then it's over.
Yeah.
And you don't really know what happens. And I agree, your imagination can come up with something so much more awful than what we actually see. And again, the reality of it is we're dealing with 1979 graphics and effects, and they didn't want to show too much, and they couldn't show too much. Because again, it's a guy in a suit. And they wanted it to look like a humanoid creature, so they found the 6'10" guy, going back to what we said at the beginning of the podcast. So they had to hide certain things, you know what I mean? So they had to make it in the shadows, and you couldn't see everything. And like just like when we see the final scene with Ripley in the escape pod and the alien is like literally just crushed back into the middle of the ship to get away and its hand pops out, that's freaky and scary. But even in that, and then it starts to kind of crawl out and curl out from underneath the side of the ship where it's hiding. Again, we see flashes of the alien, but we don't see its full form. We see the head, we see the mouth, we see the hands, and we see the tail. We see little bits and pieces, but they don't really show you the full 6'10" version outside of the outside of a few months where you see the shadows of it, like when Brett dies, things like that.
Yeah.
But yeah, your imagination really takes over, and it's that much more scary. So again, it's a cool little cutaway scene. I'm glad I've seen it. Like, it's cool to see that, knowing what we get in Aliens, like the cocooning part, but it's not necessary. And, again, it's nice to see Dallas one last time. Tom Skerritt, shout out. But, yeah, I don't really need it. When I read the director's cut thing, and from my understanding, Ridley Scott was kind of resistant to it at first because he's like, what am I changing? Like, I like the what I have. And then I read about it's like 1 minute shorter. I was like, wow, you just went in and cut more shit out. And added a 4-minute scene. So yeah, again, I don't think it's a much different version of what is a quote unquote director's cut.
The only thing I wish was in the theatrical cut was Lambert slapping the shit out of Ripley and then getting in that little fight. It added to all those little moments that were boiling over before they actually went and got into the alien ship. Like, they were all kind of pissed off at each other for little reasons, and it boiled over in that moment. And I liked that. It was a great like burst of tension to have her slap her and they get in that quick tussle or whatever. And that outside of that, all the rest of these scenes don't need to be in there, but they were nice little accents.
Well, and one last thing I want to talk about real quick before we get to our categories. And I know we've raved on multiple podcasts about how much we love Sigourney Weaver as Ripley. Like, that's one of the most iconic science fiction characters and heroines of all time. One thing that I love more than anything about the way this film was produced and the script was written and Ripley became the lead character is that Ripley is always, I think, from my memory, always the smartest one in the room.
Mm-hmm.
She's the one who says, hey, you got an alien life form attached to your fucking face. You got to be quarantined for 24 hours. You're a danger. And even later when they learn, like, because I know that scene you're talking about where, because Parker was also disagreeing, he's like, hey, you shouldn't have let it in. Like, now we could all die.
Yeah.
You're a fucking idiot, Dallas. Like, Ash, like, you guys are going to get us all killed. And sure enough, that's what happens. She's the one who doesn't want to let the thing on board. She's the one who deciphers the distress call and realizes it's not a distress call, it's a warning. She's the one who comes up with the plan to destroy the ship, to just get out of there and say, fuck the company, we're getting out of here. She's the one who devises the way to kill it by blowing out the airlock. Ripley is always the smartest one in the room. And at that point in 1979, we didn't have that. Like a woman heroine leading character. This was really the first of its kind in this kind of a movie. You know what I mean? Like you had Luke Skywalker. He was the hero who saved the damsel in distress, being Princess Leia. Jaws was all three dudes. It was, Brody and Hooper and Quint, three guys. You didn't have a lead female badass character who was always the smartest one in the room. And that was Ripley. She was always the smartest one in the room. If they listened to her, everything would have been different in this movie. And that is what makes her such a compelling character, is because we had never really seen anything like that before her. And then everything that comes after is some version of Ripley.
Growing up, you and I grew up in about the same era, watching the same big blockbuster movies. All the heroes, Indiana Jones, Marty McFly, The Goonies, it's all male centric, but there was one other hero that I always had that entire time, and that was Ripley. Like the entire time, from Aliens and Alien, she was a leader all the way through the movie. Even in the early moments of the movie where she's kind of talking with Dallas, you can tell like she's not just like kowtowing to him because he's the captain. She's asserting herself. And by the way, the only other voice of reason in the movie was Lambert. Once Dallas was taken, she's like, let's blow this ship up. Let's take a one of the little ships and just get the fuck out of here. Like she says it. She says what the audience would be thinking. The two women are the ones going, let's get the hell out of here. And Parker too. To credit Parker, he was like, fuck all this shit.
Yeah.
That's something that at the time was absolutely groundbreaking. It really was. And the casting of Sigourney Weaver, I'm sure we're going to get to that in categories. The casting of Sigourney Weaver, just sealed the deal.
Yeah, it's just a brilliant character, and I want to highlight that because, again, I'm not saying there have never been strong female characters in these kind of movies ever before, but this was the game changer. She was always the smartest one in the room. If they listened to Ripley, they would have survived. At least some of them would have survived, and it wouldn't have just been her. But, in the end, she's the one who survives because she was the smartest one in the room. So I appreciate that she was written that way. And again, going back to the original script, it wasn't written that way. It was all Ripley was a man. They were all men.
Yeah.
So the fact that Ridley Scott had the foresight to not only turn Ripley into a woman, but make her the heroine, make her the survivor, make her the smartest one in the room. Huge credit to Ridley Scott, because this film doesn't play the same if it's a guy named if it's Eric Ripley and it's some dude. It feels so much more generic, so much more atypical to what we know. And I'm not saying it wouldn't have been a good film, because the bones would have still been there. But the fact that it was Ripley as a woman was groundbreaking and so different than anything that had been done up to that time. And every character that we get, every character we get after that in horror or science fiction, that strong, powerful, smart woman is some bit or piece of Ellen Ripley.
Yeah, it's the DNA of Ripley all day long. And that's credit to Sigourney Weaver, which I'm sure we'll be talking about shortly. One thing before we go to categories, Damon, do you know what the original ending of the movie was?
Do I know this? Why do I feel like I do know this? Tell me anyways, because I feel like I do know this.
So what Ridley Scott calls the fourth act, which is the scene of her in the escape pod, and she realizes the alien's in there with her. She strips down, gets into the spacesuit, and blows it out the airlock. That's the fourth act of this movie. Originally, she was not going to win. Originally, the alien was going to win. And the alien was going to then call for a distress signal using her voice, saying, "This is Ellen Ripley, like, come find, like, someone come help me." And I'm like, boy, would that have shit the bed.
Yeah.
like I don't know why. Dan Dan O'Bannon's great ideas. We didn't use them all, folks, thankfully, but that would have been the weirdest ending. I would have been like, I mean, it would have been creepy. I get it. The creep factor of it makes sense.
It's a more dystopian ending, you know. We don't, and you know, it's like, you know, it's like the shark winning in Jaws, you know, like
But it's like the shark winning in Jaws and then grabbing the radio and going, "It's me, Brody. Come and get me. I'm over here."
yeah. Yeah,
It's weird.
I'm telling you right now, like I mean, I did notice the similarities and like everything, but really they truly did like take Alien and then reshape it into Species. Like 10 years later, whenever they made Species in 1989 with Natasha Richard, they're like, we're gonna make a horny movie, we're gonna make it really sexualized, and we're, you know, like they really did take all the bones of that and like kind of turn it into that movie. But yeah, that's. I mean, I get it, and I do occasionally like the dark endings where, you know, the good guy,
Yeah, I love them.
you know, the dystopian ending. But yeah, that would have been a totally different movie had they ended it that way.
Yeah, it was an odd ending. But I will say this before we move into categories: if you're gonna rip off any movie, rip off Alien. I mean, it's lightning in a bottle, man. There are few movies where I can say don't change a frame of this, don't change anything, director's cut or otherwise. Like this movie is fucking perfect. Like go make your movie however you want to make it, and like literally just rip this off. Like figure out a way to rip it off either on the structural level, on the production design level, rip it off on the visceral level. Like find your way because this movie is unflappable.
There are a lot of Alien copies out there. One thing I will, and this is again, I know I'm an amateur. You know, I'm a professional writer, but an amateur when it comes to filmmaking. So I'm sure any screenwriter who might listen to this would tell me to fuck right off. But one thing I did notice of science fiction movies that have the bones of Alien as their DNA of what makes that movie. One biggest complaint. I'm not going to name names. I don't want to downplay it. I just want to mention it. And I know anyone listening to this will probably say, "Oh yeah, I know what you're talking about. I know the movies you're talking about," without saying it. They take this formula and they try to overcomplicate it.
Yeah.
Don't do that. This is such a, and I understand you can't just make fucking Alien. I get it. You can't just make Alien over again. But like again, Species. It's not the best movie in the world. I enjoy it. I still enjoy Species. It's a fun, horny, you know, movie, and you know, I still enjoy it for what it is. But it's basically Alien, really reshaped in Los Angeles or wherever it takes place in, you know, the 1980s, and the bones of it are very similar to what Alien is. A lot of the science fiction movies that came after Alien that said, we're going to take Alien, but we're going to make it better. No, you didn't. Like, you may have tried, and there are good versions. Let me be clear. There are good versions of an Alien-esque story. But by and large, when you try to overcomplicate and you add in all these wrinkles, and we'll get to it eventually when they did the prequel with Prometheus, which I have just a multitude of issues with. When you try to overcomplicate it, you ruin what made Aliens such a simple, effective, classic horror story. That's it. I just want to throw that in there.
Keep it simple. And every movie that we've ever said was great on this podcast was very simple. And this movie's incredibly simple. And I think it's a lesson in how to tell your stories. Like, you think you need to say a lot, you don't.
Yeah, it's just like the character development. There is no character development. We don't know these people. No. But by the end, you're caring whether they live or die.
You care whether they live or die, and they feel lived in. They feel like they belong in that world. Like that goes way beyond what you write on the page or what they have to say out of their mouths. Everything they do, every movement, everything matters towards making them feel authentically like they really exist in that space.
Like, they've been on the Nostromo together for years. This is a crew that has served together for quite some time, minus Ash, which they make sure and mention that he's a new add-on to this crew. Everyone else has been together. They've all been working together for quite a while.
Damn right.
Yeah. All right, let's get into categories, and we're going to kick things off as we do each and every week here on the show. We're going to talk about best performance. Let me just mention real quick. I know I say this sometimes when we do these shows, and I know people probably get sick of me saying this. Everyone in this cast was great. There was not a weak link in this cast. And obviously, a lot of people from this movie went on to do other great things. You know, Harry Dean Stanton had an incredible career. Sigourney Weaver, we all know. Tom Skerritt had a great career. Yaphet Kotto, we actually talked about him when we did the Freddy's, the Nightmare on Elm Street
That's
series.
right.
And Freddy's dead.
Not his best day.
Not his best day of work necessarily, but he's in that movie. So yeah, everyone in here, was a good actor. I want to throw that out there. This is a 7-person ensemble cast plus the one guy for the aliens. So basically 8 people in this movie, and everyone did a great job.
Oh yeah, no, this is a perfect cast. Ridley Scott said it. His favorite ensemble he's ever worked with. I mean, that's for a man with a storied career. That's an incredible statement to make. Damon, are you going to be shocked if I tell you that my best performance is Sigourney Weaver as Ripley?
Really?
I mean, come on. I went out on a limb this time. I went against the grain. You know me, agent provocateur. Yeah, come on, guys, gals, everybody in between. We all love Ripley. We all worship at her altar because she did something that like nobody else could do. What she did is she grounded this movie. And this is in Sigourney Weaver's performance. Now, when Ridley Scott cast this movie, he said when she walked in the door, I knew it was her. He goes, it didn't take but 5 seconds. But what really got me was when she started acting in front of me. She wasn't overacting. She wasn't giving me everything she could possibly give. Everything she was giving me was behind her eyes. She's a very measured character.
Yeah.
As measured as she can be. You could see that she's frustrated sometimes, but she doesn't overdo it. You can tell that people get under her skin, but she doesn't overdo it. And then when it's time to get pissed off, when she launches at Parker at one point and she goes, "God damn it," she says something. It's like the screams I heard at my house growing up. Like it's real anger, right? There are so many small moments in this movie where you realize that acting is about how subtle you can be, not how big you can be. And Sigourney Weaver just gives a masterclass in subtlety. There's a moment that I'd never noticed before, the way I noticed it this time. When she discovers Lambert and Parker dead. And it's one of the more horrific scenes in the movie. Like she sees like kind of in the foreground, you can see a bit of what must be Lambert, and then Parker hunched over and blood dripping down him. She groans and shudders in a way that just felt so real in that moment. Like it felt like somebody, like, Damon, we've watched thousands of horror movies and action movies where people get shot to death and killed. She was playing a person who might never have seen a dead body in her life.
Yeah.
And the people that she was about to get away with have just been viciously murdered by this monster. And she shudders and shakes and groans in a way that felt so a bit visceral. That same thematic thread of viscerality comes across in that moment. And I just went, oh, that felt so real. That's Sigourney Weaver. That's the genius of Sigourney Weaver.
Yeah, she's incredible. And as I mentioned at the beginning, this was her second thing ever. Like, it's wild. Like, there's just certainly a lot of great actors out there get better as they get more work. And that's not a knock. That's just experience. You get better with experience. But there's certain actors, I don't know why I'm thinking of this as an example, but like when you see Leonardo DiCaprio in What's Eating Gilbert Grape and he's a kid, you see him right away and say, oh, that kid's good. And he just continued to grow. But you knew it, right? You knew it, right? Even as a kid actor, you knew right then that kid was good. Sigourney Weaver, this is her second role ever. And she killed it. And it's wild to think that the original person they were considering for this role was her old Yale classmate, Meryl Streep, was the original person they thought about for Ripley, but then her partner, John Cazale, died, and they decided, you know what, we can't bother her, we can't, we don't want to, we don't want to contact her and, burden her with this offer, make her make choices while she's grieving. And so they went to Sigourney Weaver. And even Sigourney Weaver was a stroke of luck. Like, from my understanding, she missed the audition. She was late to the audition. They had to stick around for her. She finally got in there. And then, as you said, Ridley Scott saw her and was like, this is Ripley. But it's wild. And I know there's a million stories like this in film history as far as people who were going to play parts and didn't play parts and casting all that kind of
yeah.
stuff. But and Meryl Streep's obviously an incredible actress. Like,
if you were going to replace her with anybody, you'd have to replace her with Meryl Streep.
Yeah, but it's wild to think that like Meryl Streep was the one they considered. Of course, Meryl Streep went on to become one of the greatest actors of any generation, and then Sigourney Weaver steps in here in her second role ever and absolutely murders it in this role. She's incredible. Yeah, she's unbelievable, and she really does make this movie, and she becomes synonymous with the entire Alien franchise. So yeah, so. Of course, the real answer to best performance is Sigourney Weaver. Let me be honest about that. But I did go a different route because I wanted to pay homage to somebody else in this movie. And the other person that I think really did steal the show, when you really watch the performance, who had the best nuanced, and when I say this word, you're going to know what I'm talking about, the most sinister performance of this entire movie. And that is Ian Holm as Ash.
Yep.
Of course, Ian Holm passed away. He passed away a couple years ago. He was great in The Fifth Element. More recently, he was great in The Day After Tomorrow. He's in that movie more recently, and as far as like the last like 10, 15 years, but he passed away for a couple years ago. He is so good in this movie, and when you so the big reveal that he's an android is shocking in the moment because you realize he's kind of he's a science officer, he's a man of science. So he's kind of cold and a little detached throughout the movie anyways, but then when you find out he's an android, you're like, oh shit, like I really do understand it. But then go back and, as you said, rewatch the movie a couple times. You see all the little subtleties, not only that hint to him being an android, but also that hint to him being basically a plant for the company to save the alien and fuck the crew.
Yeah.
Like, you find out in that moment with Mother that she says the crew's expendable, but you see little dots, just like I talked about with the distress signal. When he says, what's the purpose of that? Letting them in from the quarantine. All the little things that Ash does that leads them to destruction, to death and destruction. Watch it and then rewatch it, and you'll see the little nuances and the subtle things that Ian Holm does with that character that just spell doom for this crew. Like, as much as the alien kills them, Ian Holm as Ash dooms them just as much. Because they don't get on board without Ash. They don't let the alien escape. They don't potentially let the alien escape Kane without Ash. All the things that happen are because he sets it in motion. And
totally.
So his performance is so sinister, and it takes you a couple times watching it to really understand what he was doing with that character.
He never had to be a robot. Like the script could have never gone that direction. It is just the way he plays it. He's cold. He's calculating, but he doesn't feel robotic. Like, nothing about him feels robotic ever. It's how he, like, the way he was like, oh, well, let me think about this humanoid android robot and not go, does not compute. Like, he never does that. Never. Even after they've beheaded him and they rewired him to start talking again, he doesn't talk like a robot. Nothing about him changes. He doesn't make any of those choices. He stuck to the humanity of that character, which was the lack of humanity. The fact that he was sociopathic, that he was goal driven, that he was cold and callous towards those people. He used the human element to make that character impactful, not the robot element. He just knew how to weave in the certain robotic things, to be able to recite the contract from memory instantly, to be able to talk about the alien's makeup when he was examining it or talking about things that he had learned about from it. But for the most part, you could take out that he was an android and nothing about that performance needs to change at all. It's genius.
It's such a good performance. He was a great character actor throughout his entire career, but this was just gold standard acting. Like I said, again, Sigourney Weaver is unbelievable, and this was the movie that introduced me and the rest of the world to Sigourney Weaver. But Ian Holm really does deserve a lot of credit for how much he helped. As much as Sigourney Weaver stole the show, if she had a silver medalist in this movie, it's 100% Ian Holm.
100%. Like, no question. They are the two stars of the show.
It is. And again, to be clear, everyone was good, though. Like Tom
Scott. Oh, yeah.
They're all good. Veronica Cartwright, Yaphet Kotto is incredible. I love
so great.
The whole character. I grew up to become a huge Harry Dean Stanton fan. Like, he was in Big Love. He
Yeah.
obviously he also passed away. Sadly, a lot of people in this cast have passed away. But Harry Dean Stanton went on to have a great big career, and he's incredible too. Everyone in this cast is good. The only the one cast I'm gonna call it out right now. We're talking about best performance. You know the one cast member that I don't like in this movie, Patrick?
Do tell.
The fucking cat. That cat,
Jonesy.
that cat gets more people killed in this movie than anybody. Like that fucking cat running away and doing shit. Like it gets more people killed in this movie than fucking Ash does.
It really does. It really was the reason. And in Aliens, she's like, "You're staying here."
Yeah,
when she goes to the LV-426, she's like, "No, you are not coming with me, Jonesy."
Yeah, and fuck you, Jones. You stay right here. You keep escaping, and people run after you, and then you get fucking killed. And it's like you're setting us up. We know cats are evil. We all know that.
Yeah.
Like, you know, the cat was 100% trying to get Brett killed. You know that, right? Like
he wanted to watch that happen
because the cat was lurking behind the thing and like looking at it, like, let me just see this fucker die.
That, especially in that moment where like you hear Brett's screams echoing in the room, and the cat's just kind of looking, just kind of watching, going, "Oh, that's interesting. I never thought about killing somebody that way.
Yeah,
Good to know."
Is what I'm saying. Fuck Jonesy is all I'm saying. So,
what if Alien Romulus, the new Fede Alvarez movie, is where the alien attached itself to Jonesy and became the cat alien?
You know what I appreciate about the Alien franchise is they continue to evolve and change how the aliens are created,
Yeah.
and just like they do, of course, in Alien 3, which we'll get to in a couple movies from now. But and that's a whole other deep dive into like what the original Alien 3 was going to be.
Right.
We'll talk about at that point. But yeah, like I like that they keep evolving how the aliens are created. So maybe Jonesy was infected. Maybe that's what actually happened. Fucking cat.
We'll find out.
Yeah. Let's talk about favorite character. We had 7 crew members on the Nostromo. So, what is your favorite? Who is your favorite character in Alien?
I loved everybody. I really did. The answer would have been everybody, truly, because everyone gave their little moments, had their little moments. Ridley Scott calls it the best grouping of character, the best group of character actors on the planet, is what he called it. But I ultimately went with Yaphet Kotto's Parker. Yaphet Kotto's Parker, as I mentioned early in the podcast, sort of the blue collar, him and Brett are the blue collar guys on the ship. They're engineers. They're making sure the mechanics on the ship are going correctly. They're not respected in the same way. Parker would bring up the grievances a guy like myself would bring up. He'd be like, "Hey, you're not considering us just because like we're the grunts. Like fuck this shit." You know, and his pleas to when he's pleading to Dallas and Ash, he's going, "Just freeze him, dude. Freeze him. Like, what are you doing?" Like, I could have given best performance to Yaphet Kotto because I'm hearing the desperation in the character's voice. Like, dude, I'm the fucking grunt worker here, and I know what we should be doing. Why aren't you doing it? That doesn't make sense. And them completely ignoring him. And then there's the other things where it's like he likes to push buttons. You know, he loved it. He was talking about the shares. He had a contentious relationship with Ripley. He poked at her. That was his thing. His thing was to fucking poke at her. He didn't like her. Probably thought she was too much of a stiff upper lip. He didn't like her. So he fucked with her all the time. All these great little nuances to this character that I really loved.
Very sarcastic and very biting. You know, that great scene where Ripley comes down there and Brett and Parker are talking to her and she says, "Fuck off, Parker." He's like, "What'd you say, Rip? What'd you say?"
Yeah, the steam. He's got the steam going super loud, so he can't hear what she's saying.
Yeah, like and just like I said, I mean, even like I said, jokingly with like the horny scene when they're about to eat dinner, and he's like, "I wish I was eating something else." Yeah. It's just very like he's got the best one-liners in this movie. Like he's
definitely
that guy, and I love Yaphet Kotto. So originally, again, to be fair, how we do this is Patrick, you make the categories, you make your picks, and then I make my picks. So I know your picks going into it, you don't know mine, and I generally try to pick different things, so we're not always having the same conversation. Originally, Parker was going to be my choice because I thought you were going to go for the other route, which was everyone's favorite choice, which is what I'm going to talk about now, which is Ellen Ripley. As a character, I don't want to just repeat everything I said 10 minutes ago, but because she is the smartest person in the room, because she makes all the right choices, makes me love that character, because so much of what is predicated around horror and science fiction in these situations is inevitably someone making a dumb decision. It's written into the DNA of these films, and I understand it. You don't get to horrific atrocities being carried out without somebody making a dumb decision. You know what I mean? It doesn't matter. It's the tale as old as time where horror is concerned. We all understand that. And you have to separate yourself enough to understand people actually do make dumb decisions. Now, we have complained on this podcast numerous times when characters in films just continuously make dumb, really idiotic decisions, and it ruins a movie. Because you're just like, there's no way they would do that. It's one thing to we should have turned left and we went right. It's a whole other thing when you're making, you're like, hold on. It's like the car commercial when they're like, let's run behind the wall of chainsaws. No, let's just run. Why don't we go in the running car? And the guy's like, are you insane? The really stupid choices that we mock on this show sometimes. You need dumb choices sometimes to get where you're at in these movies. The dumb choices that lead to the destruction of the Nostromo and the death of this cast are not unequivocally stupid. They're doing, exploring an alien ship is what they're told to do. Kane getting attacked, all they're really trying to do is save their crewmate. They're not scientists. Remember, these are people collecting ore in the middle of space. They're basically, miners, for lack of a better word.
Yeah.
So they're not out there, they're not space explorers, they're not scientists, they're not soldiers. Some guy gets attacked, they're just trying to save him. They're not worried about we're bringing an alien onto the ship and it's going to attack us and be the death of us all. They're not thinking that deeply about it. They're thinking we got to save this guy's life. So the decisions that Dallas and them make sense in the moment. But Ripley being the voice of reason saying, no, the rule is we get something alien, something we don't know, some unknown life form is out there. You have to be quarantined for 24 hours. I can't let you on the ship. Everything that she does is the right choice. And I appreciate that there's that one voice of reason. And in this movie, it's Ripley.
Yeah, Damon, we could basically have just gone down the line and talked about why every character in this movie is great.
Yeah.
They all add something to it. They all do their part. There's no dead weight in this movie. There's just not even Jonesy, who I know you hate. Nobody's dead weight in this movie. They all carry their part. We could literally go on about all the people in this movie.
Yeah, they're all good. They are all really good. I liked all the characters. So, all right, let's talk about best line. And Patrick, you bastard, you have the best line. Let me be honest about this. I wish I could tell you that you didn't, but you do have the best line. So set up your best line, which is actually the overall best line, although I did pick a different one. So what is your best line? Set it up for us and we'll play it here.
It is certainly the best line of the movie, but it's also a very important line in all horror films, and that is the praise of the killer speech. When one character talks about the killer, talks about the monster in a reverential way. And it's, by the way, one of my favorite scenes of all time in this movie is when they knocked Ash's head off after he tried to kill Ripley, realizing he's an android. They replug him back in to get whatever kind of information they can get out of him. And what he gives them is not helpful in the least.
I admire its purity. A survivor. Unclouded by conscience, remorse, or delusions of morality.
Look, I've heard enough of this, and I'm asking you to pull the plug.
Last word.
What?
I can't lie to you about your chances, but you have my sympathies.
So cold.
So cold. And when he talks about admiring it, it's something he would like to be. He admires it. There's penis envy, right? Literally. It's cold, it's calculating. It's not weighed down by remorse or morality or any of those things. It's pure. And he loved it for that, because I think part of him related to it. It's just this pure killing machine. Yeah. Very haunting line, delivered so well with that gurgling, dying digital voice is just fucking perfect.
Yeah, you have my sympathies. It's like you're fucked. So
Yeah.
good luck is basically what he's saying. So
Eat
yeah,
your heart out, Hal 9000. That's a droid fucking giving you the bad news.
and I like what you said there is like he wants to be like he envies the alien in a way. Like he
Yeah.
envies that like he's not that cold and calculating or that he can't be that cold and calculating because as you said, he's 30% human. He doesn't want that. He wants to be as cold and calculating as the alien. So that's terrifying line, which kind of speaks to where we're at now with artificial intelligence. My favorite line goes back to when Kane first comes on the ship and they're trying to figure out what this face hugger is on him. And a couple of very important lines are spoken that really carry on throughout the entire Alien franchise. Arguably, two of the most important lines regarding the future of what we become to know as the xenomorph of the alien itself when they give it a name. And this is one of the most iconic parts of the movie when they try to remove the alien from his face and they cut into the finger and acid pours out and it goes down into the ship and Dallas freaks out and says it's gonna burn through the goddamn hull. And they run to the ship and they find where this acid's bleeding out. And it's a conversation with Dallas, with Brett, and with Parker, where they basically realize how dangerous this alien truly is, dead or alive.
Don't say anything like that except molecular acid.
You must be using it for blood. It's got a wonderful defense mechanism. You don't dare kill it.
Just that simple line. Wonderful defense mechanism. You don't dare kill it.
Yeah, totally. I mean, what a great way to just set up that, like, what we're going to go up against, we can't shoot it. That's not going to help.
Yeah.
That's not going to get us out of this situation. And like, you know, now you're in a real tricky predicament. And it was great setup.
I just like that you must be using it for blood, which becomes a hallmark of this entire franchise. It's acid for blood. And then obviously it says wonderful defense mechanism. You don't dare kill it because you realize if you actually kill this thing, if you actually cut it in half and kill it, it's going to burn through your ship and you're going to die in space.
Yeah.
It's harrowing and it really does set up everything that comes with these aliens, from Aliens to Alien 3 to Alien Resurrection. Everything is built upon that revelation of the acid for blood.
Yeah, I love that. God, and it is one of those other moments in the film where I like unforgettable dialogue.
Yeah, it's great. It's just great delivery. All right, let's talk about best scare because this is at its core, as much as I love Aliens and we will do Aliens next, that is much more of an action movie than it is a horror movie. Now there are definitely horror elements.
Oh yeah.
It is, but that's much more of an action movie than it is just a straight up horror movie. Alien is a straight up horror movie. There are a lot of good scares in this movie. So, Patrick, what is your best scare in Alien? I have to imagine this was hard for you to narrow down.
It was hard to narrow down. But I really went for, like, again, on this one, I was looking at the viscerality of it all. I have always loved when Kane comes upon the egg and just the build up there. It's fantastic dread and tension in the build up because he's examining the egg. You can see the fluttering on the inside. As you said, it was Ridley Scott's hands and rubber gloves in there making the motions. And then the egg opens up this very weird organic way that it kind of flowers at him. And he looks in and you see, you know, they use real, like, I think it was like sheep and cow organs and sinew and fats and stuff. So it looks like real gore. And then there's just this moment where you see a slithering and then the way it jumps out, I think, taps into sort of like this visceral humanistic thing. Like if you see a spider on the wall and you want it to leave the room and you're trying to brush it away and it jumps at you, it's the exact same reaction. And this is a spider-like creature. It has that look to it, but the tail whips and the fingers reach out into your face and it's just it's so primal. The fear is so primal in that moment that I went for that scare this time around.
That is a great one. And that is honestly, that is the moment in this movie when shit gets real. Like up to that point, you're not quite sure what's going to happen. Like you really don't know what they're looking at. Now, granted, when you fall down into this cavern and there's this weird mist and a laser looking thing and you run down and you see eggs, my first instinct would be run. not let's see what's in the fucking eggs. But when that thing flowers out and opens up and he looks down into the egg and you're like, holy shit, something's going to happen. And I know I say this all the time. Some of the best scares are when you know something's coming and it still works. That to me is the most effective scare in horror films, when you know something's coming, but it still works.
Yeah.
And that's a perfect example of that. You know it's not going to end well. You know something's coming out of that egg, and it's not. Now, do you expect it to crash through his helmet and wrap on attached to his face? Absolutely not. But you know something's coming. You know something's going to pop out of this fucking egg. That is the moment when shit gets real. Like, that is the moment when you're like, oh, yeah, they're fucked. It's such a great moment. And it is. It's actually very scary, because when it happens, you're like, oh, it's so jarring the way it happens. Yeah. So that is an iconic scene. So for me, I debated this one for a long time, Patrick, because I was like, man, the scene when the arm pops out at Ripley and the escape pod is really fucking good.
Great scare.
The Dallas death, when he just sees the alien just pops out in front of him and his arms are out of him, that's a great scare. Brett dying is a good scare, although again, very foreboding. You see, you know something's going to happen, but still very good. But I just keep revisiting to the classic, the moment that shocked me the most. And I wish I'd been able to see this movie in the theater and not have seen other movies before it. It's the chest burster scene.
Amazing.
Even though I had seen Spaceballs and I had seen Alien, when I finally did see Alien and I understood the full breadth of what that is, because really they do show it in Aliens, one's in a dream sequence and they show it on LV-426, but that's really it. That's the only time you really see the chest bursting scene again. It's still not as visceral and as real as what happens in Alien, when Kane starts convulsing and choking and twitching and you know, going into spasms, and then this thing just fucking punches through his chest. And you just feel it. And one thing I want to compliment Ridley Scott on with this is it's dead silent. Mm-hmm. There's no background score like dun dun dun. You know, no big orchestra. Dead silence. You hear this thing punching through him.
Yeah.
And you hear the crunch of the bone, and you hear him going ah, and everyone's like, oh shit. And then you see it just punch through, and the second time this thing comes out, the big silver tooth cock. It's so jarring when that happens, because again, I saw Spaceballs, I saw Aliens. When I finally saw Alien, I still was stunned at how it happened. So that to me is the best scare.
And Damon, it rolls right into my best gore, which was the chestburster scene. But it's scary all the same. I went to go see this. I think it was on its 40 or 45 year release in the theater. I went to go see it. Packed house, clearly a bunch of big Alien fans, but it's my favorite movie. I have to see it on a big screen.
I actually did get to see this in the theater as well. I think it was the same release I saw it. Yeah, actually I did.
Yeah. Every one of the scares worked. And I was surprised by that, because I'm like, I'd memorized this movie. So I was like, I knew every scare was coming, but the amount of people in the audience that were jumping, that were reacting to something that I think they all knew. When I remember I was sitting next to a woman when his chest explodes with that big blood splatter, like before it actually breaks through. I mean, either that woman had never heard of Alien or the chest burster in her entire life, or it is truly one of the greatest scares that's ever been manufactured. She jumped to fucking high hell. And then, Damon, as we talked about at length earlier, in the next cut, it emerges, and that gorgeous gore, because this is my best gore, as it rises out covered in blood, and its tail slithering around his intestines, and the blood upwelling from his chest cavity. And as you mentioned, which I fucking love, the little detail of his hands twitching as the life is leaving his nervous system. It's a thing of absolute beauty. It is what turned me, Damon, to a gore horror. Because you could just pause that scene and play it over and over and over again if you're a psycho like me. Because you just go, how did this like it's the perfect constructed scene, and then the gore in it is just gorgeous. And Ridley Scott used real, like I mentioned earlier, he was using pig intestines and cow intestines. He was having the butcher and the fishmongers and like anybody who was dealing in blood and guts, he'd go get real blood and guts and put it on there. So the set must have stunk to high hell. But that gore in there, I mean, everything about it felt real. Damon, I watched one of my kids get cut out of my wife's belly. Not too dissimilar. Like, not too dissimilar. We've talked about the great Tom Savini on this show, the great Greg Nicotero. The effects in this movie actually won an Oscar.
Yeah, nice.
This is an Oscar-winning movie for its visual effects, because the effects in this movie are that intense. And the chest burster scene is, to me, the greatest scare in maybe all of horror history, and one of the greatest pieces of gore you will ever see, period.
So this is the best gore. I'm not going to sit here and pretend it's not. It is the best gore. When that thing crunches through his bones and punches through his chest the first time, and the blood goes flying and hits everybody. And Veronica Cartwright's reaction is so iconic when she just like freaks out that she just got splattered with blood. And I rewatched this scene no less than 5 times when I was rewatching to get ready for this podcast, because I wanted to examine every crew member as it happened. I wanted to specifically key in on each crew member. That's where I got my funny Ash moment where he just gets wide-eyed and just watches it walk away when he's like, don't touch it, and he just goes, woo. Everyone has a different reaction. Ripley's shocked reaction. Dallas kind of like stunned, but also like, he's actually one of the people holding down Kane.
Yeah.
Parker was like on the ground trying to put the fork in his mouth to make him from biting down on it, trying to keep his tongue. They thought he was having convulsions, or he was going into that. He was having a seizure. All the little intricacies of that. And then when the thing bursts out of his chest and just the blood just goes flying. And boy, I tell you what, the blood man on set that day earned his paycheck. And when that thing comes out and it just does that little, and then it's honestly the best gore is when the creature comes out and it's all white and, very phallic, as you mentioned, the silver teeth. There's like this little drip of blood flows over the top of its head. And you realize, oh, that's Kane's innards just like wrapped around this creature. Yeah. It's such an attention to detail. And so like disgusting that it's absolutely the best gore.
Oh my God. Could you, Damon, if I was going to do a time machine, I'd go, please take me back to opening night of Alien in 1979 and let me watch people watch that happen on screen. It's incredible.
One of my favorite things on like when I go on TikTok, they do like the they film audience reactions. Like I enjoy it. Yeah. I watched the audience reaction when all of the Avengers return and Avengers.
Oh yeah,
everyone's like, oh, cheering, and Black Panther. When Spider-Man No Way Home came out and you see Andrew Garfield, everyone freaks. I enjoy to watch those.
I love those. Yeah,
that's one of the best parts of the theater experience, is enjoying it with a group of people. I wish there was video of people seeing this first time in 1979, like a camera on them of seeing this fucking thing burst out of this guy's chest. It would have been so great.
Oh, I want that. I want that experience so bad. It's incredible. It's so incredible, David. It's so incredible.
Let's talk about the best sci-fi details. Can you explain this category, Patrick?
Well, I figure I don't think we ever do sci-fi on this show. Very rare. I think it's very rare if we've ever done a sci-fi horror. It's not
really. Not that I can. I'm sure we have, but not
like Chopping Mall, kinda, like a little bit. Barely. So there was just too much sci-fi deliciousness in this movie not to just take a moment to appreciate it, because again, you are dealing with one of the greatest production designers of all time. Truth be told, I'm not the biggest Blade Runner fan, like the original Blade Runner, but I agree that it is maybe the best production design film ever made. Like just the attention to detail.
Gorgeous.
It's a gorgeous film. You get that in Alien in spades. Like it's all over this movie. Again, you can pour your eyes can pour over the entire screen and get experiences left and right. So I was like, I do have to take a moment out to just go, Is there something in the background, something you saw that you just absolutely loved? And for me, it was the wet room. And ever since I was a kid, and when I was a kid, I didn't give a shit about, any of the science part of the science fiction. I was just way into the fiction part. People bring up it's not supposed to rain in there, whatever. I didn't care. But that room is so coolly designed. It's some sort of boiler room or something. There's heavy equipment in there that is often you're not noticing it because you're too busy on the great close-ups of like Harry Dean Stanton or Veronica Cartwright or etc. But whenever people enter that room, everything in that room is perfectly made, and it also is perfectly used. Nothing's clean. It looks like it's been mining ore on some far distant comet or some dusty old planet. Everything looks used. Everything looks it like it's been in working order, and it's the design of it looks fucking awesome. You go, damn, like what is that machine over there? Like, and these are things that just play the background. They're never in the shot. They don't play a part in the plot, but they are so perfectly designed. You believe they're real.
Yeah, oh, absolutely. It's a really, again, the attention to detail in this movie is pretty amazing for what it was. Again, you can read, online a million different articles about all the miniatures and the set design and the sets they built and where they built them and how they built them. It really was a huge attention to detail, and Ridley Scott, deserves all the praise in the world for kind of mastering this and kind of maneuvering this to work the way it did, and make it look the way it looked. Because the Nostromo as a whole doesn't look like what you would think a normal spaceship would look like. Like, it doesn't look like anything out of Star Wars. He created a totally wholly new looking spacecraft. Same thing with with the rooms inside. You talk about the wet room, same kind of thing. Like, this is a ship made to mine ore. It's a mining ship. So he made it look like a mining ship. And so that wet room is a perfect example of that.
Yeah, the whole place is essentially a refinery. So it functions like one, and it looks like one, and it sounds like one, and it looks like it smells like one. Like I just loved all those fucking details.
Yeah. So my original answer for best sci-fi detail, which is something we're going to discuss in greater detail when we get to Prometheus, which I do love, when they go down into the derelict spaceship and you find the alien creature with the chest burst out, and you're just like, what the fuck is this? Mm-hmm. And for the next 40 years or 30 years or however long until they fucked up Prometheus, people theorized and questioned and wondered how it all came to be, and what was that creature? What was that alien? How did this happen? Why? And again, not to ruin a spoiler for a future review, I enjoyed the mystery of it. I enjoyed the not knowing. It's just like, that's scarier, because it's like, oh shit, there was another alien race and these things came out of them. Okay, that was my original answer. That's an easy one though. So I want to go a little deeper. I want to go a little deeper in this movie, Patrick, because that's such an easy one. And I do want to talk about that if we can in a second. We didn't really talk about that part, but my favorite sci-fi detail rewatching it this time was the self-destruct mechanism in the ship.
Oh, I love that detail.
As sci-fi movies, we talk about, how difficult it would be to, in some sense, to make Alien in 2023 because the impatience of the studios, or in some cases the audience, of waiting an hour to the exciting incident where the alien appears. In modern cinema, a self-destruct mechanism is literally opening a glass case and punching a button. But not on this one. You have to. She opens a case from underneath the floor. She has to unscrew 2 screws, pop that open. She has to bring up these 4 different cylinders, punch in all these buttons and keys, and flip all these switches and everything to actually activate it. I love that attention to detail, because it's not as simple as jokingly what they do in Spaceballs, where Dark Helmet falls backwards into a button and he hits the self-destruct mechanism. Like, that kind of becomes the running joke of science fiction films. You can just press a button. Now, I understand to a certain extent, like, you could get the idea from Star Wars where Obi-Wan Kenobi turns off the tractor beam that has trapped the Millennium Falcon. He has to shut down the tractor beam, and so that is a plot device in Star Wars, which is somewhat similar, because he doesn't just go in and press a button. He has to go into this room and do a bunch of different things. But it's kind of like that in Alien, where she has to raise up this mechanism, raise up the cylinders, open the screws, flip it off. And then when she decides that she doesn't want to destroy the ship, she wants to stop it because she needs more time and it won't allow her. And she tries to do it all in a race and tries to get it all back down. It plays a part in how this movie ends, because if it's just a button, well, she could stop the self-destruct mechanism in 2 seconds. The fact that she has to go through and raise the cylinders and screw the screws and press the buttons, she runs out of time.
And it all matters. That's the beauty of the production design, is that the overcomplication of it, first of all, makes complete sense, because you're not going to destroy a giant freighter with one button. You would never do it. It has to be such an intricate process. In fact, it would probably be far more intricate. Like, it would require 2 people in 2 different sides of the rooms doing something exactly the same. Well, for the sake of this movie, we're going to make it this complicated case that you have to screw things in and push things down and flip buttons and turn this and screw that. You'd have to do all that. And then it functions in the story as being complicated enough to get her to just miss her deadline to override it. It's fantastic. And I'm glad you brought it up, because it is one of those details that for as long as I can remember, I have pored over going, God, it just looks gorgeous. Like, I don't know what materials they were using, brass and certain acrylics and all that stuff and you could hear the heaviness and the sound design of all the tools. Like, it all looked and felt like a very functional industrial piece of machinery. So I love that you brought that detail up, because it would have gone completely over my head as just one of the many nerdy things that I've always loved about this movie.
And I will say, like, again, this movie's filmed it in 1978. It came out in 1979. The only thing, in all honesty, that truly looks dated in this movie are the computer screens themselves.
Right.
Because they didn't have the technology to know where we'd be with, like, HD televisions and everything in this day and age. But that's really, to be honest, that's truly the only thing that looks truly dated in this movie are the computer screens. Everything
but it still feels cool and still feels otherworldly.
But everything else looks futuristic. Like, everything else makes you feel like you were in the future. The computer screens are the one area where you have, like, the green screen with a little, the really, like, the old school,
dot matrix.
Dot matrix. That's the only thing that makes it look dated. Everything else, absolutely, just like the self-destruct mechanism, looks futuristic.
Yeah. No, I'm so glad you brought that detail up, because it's one I've always geeked out over. Yeah. Like for as long as I can remember, because it's just so incredibly intricate and it feels very real, very functional, and it functions in the story. That's why Ridley Scott's a master. Like, it's little things like that you go, well, that should have been a throwaway thing. It's not a throwaway thing. Everything about it, the way it's designed and the way it functions in the story, all of it matters.
Again, I don't want to jump ahead, because we are going to get to Prometheus. But I want to ask you about that, because I want to go back to the alien they discover in the ship. When they first get into that ship and you see the giant alien sitting on the chair and his chest is burst open. It became one of the great mysteries of science fiction for years after that. And obviously they don't address it in Aliens because they just land on LV-426 and there's already a colony of people living there. You know what I mean? And then they talk about the ship, but you don't actually go back into that ship in the movie. I love that scene. We didn't really talk about that scene too much, but that mystery of that creature and then the creatures that come from that creature, one of the greatest, like, teases. And I don't even really know that I've read the backstory of what it was supposed to be. They call it space jockeys, and it was a different race. Like, there's an explanation out there. I'm not going to get into details of it, of what they intended.
We'll have time in Prometheus, because it will explain all this, apparently.
What they intended it to be. There is a story out there. They called these creatures space jockeys, and they were, they got attacked by the aliens. They were just a different life form than humans. And that the same fate befell them that ends up befalling the people on the Nostromo. But that mystery of that thing, it's a humanoid creature, but it's a big creature. And then you see the chest, it looks like something burst out of it. You see the bones are pushed out versus in. Like, it didn't get attacked in, something came out of it.
Yeah.
It's one of the great all-time, like, sci-fi teases. Became one of the greatest talked about mysteries. Like, people, again, if this came out in 2023 and no one had ever seen Alien before, there would be fucking message boards on Reddit with, like, pages dedicated to people trying to figure out what that was or what it meant.
Oh, yeah.
I'm sure there still are out there some people who, saw Prometheus and said, fuck this movie, I'm gonna make up my own thing. But that is one of the great, it's so simple. It's such a great tease. Like, what the fuck is this? And then you just move on.
Oh yeah. Oh, first of all, the design is incredible, and that's really where most of Giger's like design actually gets shown off, because basically the alien ship is entirely his designs, and their production designer came in and actually recreated his concepts and executed them there. What I love about those scenes, seeing the space jockey, seeing the walls covered in like almost like a bone, like it didn't even look like it was like this weird mixture of organic and mechanical. The biomech, which is, you have biomech tattoos, I have biomech tattoos, that all comes from Giger. What I loved is that it showed that there's a bigger world outside of the world we're going to be in. That great mystery that even I was fascinated with as a kid. Like, what the fuck was that? Like, they never get back to it. It always drove me nuts that they never got back to it. What was that thing? What was the thing it was sitting in? I always imagined it was a big gun or something like that. Like, it looked like a guy sitting at a gunner or something. What was the actual guy? Like, you know, is that his face? He looks kind of like an elephant or something. What the fuck is he? It's weird. It alludes to a greater, bigger story out there somewhere. And there's a great, I'm stealing a quote from Jamie Nash, who's a screenwriter and one of the hosts of Writers Blockbusters. The rule, when you're trying to make a movie on a budget that implies much bigger things, you go small window, big world. You're getting a small window into a much bigger world. Alien, the movie, is a small window into a world that is vast and huge. The Weyland-Yutani Corporation, their names get brought up all the time. They're out there working for them. They're up to things. That's happening somewhere way out there somewhere. This alien ship and its design and its function and everything in there had meaning, everything in there had purpose, alluded to a bigger world. Most of this movie, 90% of this movie, takes place inside interiors of a spaceship.
Yeah.
Like mostly the entire movie does. And the other 10% is either on that alien ship or when she's trying to blow it out of the airlock. 90% of the movie is contained. But when you go onto that alien ship and you see this mysterious space jockey and you go down into this area that must be some sort of storage area for these eggs, and there's a laser over one of them and all that stuff, it alludes to something grander, something bigger, something more out there. So you get a full experience without ever having to have multiple planets and multiple characters. Basically Star Wars, which Star Wars was a much bigger budget movie, had a lot more going on for it in terms of studio attention and all that stuff. This was a way to make Star Wars without making tons and tons of stuff. It's genius.
The mystery of it all. And like I said, it's something you absolutely attach yourself to. And again, if this came out now, there would be websites dedicated to like, what the fuck was that? What does it mean? What does it all mean? Where did it come from? And I admit, like, again, not to, get ahead, part of the biggest issue I have with Prometheus is over explaining the origins. And I think the simplicity of this, and I'm not mad they made an origin story, but overcomplicating the origin story, and I think the mystery of this was part of what made it so scary, because we don't know what that alien is. We really don't know what the eggs are at that point. Really, again, it's a room full of these things. You know what I mean? And there's just one alien that pops out and attacks Kane. And then we're back on the Nostromo, and then it's all away from that. We never revisit it. And they never do in any of the other films. Like in Alien, when Aliens comes, they mention the ship. They mention the colonists, things like that, but we don't hear anything else about this creature, this alien. It's moved on in the story. We're just dealing with these literal killing machines that are aliens, this perfect killing machine. But it is a great mystery. It's a great little tease of like, what the fuck is this? I just had to mention that because we didn't really talk about it. And that's just like one of the best elements of this movie that makes it so scary and makes it so mysterious. Is just that one little detail, that creature sitting there with the chest burst open. And obviously when you see what happens to Kane, you're like, oh.
That's why no one's here.
Yeah, that's why no one's living here. That's why it's just all silent. There's just eggs and shit. Yeah, so.
Fantastic detail.
Let's talk about what has become one of my favorite categories in this podcast, Patrick, which is, can we survive this horror film? This is where we inject ourselves into the film. So, you and I are working on the Nostromo. We are there. We're working on the ship. We are crew members 8 and 9 on the Nostromo. Are we a surviving alien?
Well, now that depends, Damon. I fancy you and I pretty smart, but I also fancy you and I are probably more Parker and Brett types. Like we probably work for Parker and Brett. Truth be told, like Damon and Gara or Martin and Gara, they answer to Parker and Brett. is more likely what the case is. But I would be very much in the Parker camp of like, fuck whatever that is that's happening over there with Kane.
Yeah.
Why the fuck are you guys even getting near him? We're going to eventually talk about Prometheus, and everybody's always up in arms about they take their helmets off inside that room, even though their little readouts say the atmosphere is breathable. There is no stupider move than ever letting anyone near Kane.
Yeah.
There is no stupider move in any movie in movie history. Right after that thing falls off of him and he wakes up out of his coma, they go have dinner with him. They go sit and eat with him. Where spit's flying and people are talking like it's the dumbest move of all time. Me as a crew member, knowing damn well that we shouldn't be anywhere near him, I would have locked myself down in my room, and I would have been on the comms going, Damon, what's happening up there? Damon, what's happening? Parker, what's happening up there? What the fuck's going on up there? Give me an update. I'm not going anywhere near Kane, and I'd have one foot in the escape pod the whole time. So I think in that respect, I would survive. Now, okay, let's play devil's advocate and say that part didn't happen then, and I did play along, and I'm sitting there with Kane as the chest burster happens, and now I'm part of the team that's got to fight this thing. I also think I might be able to survive, not because I'm great at anything, but because I've got the same kind of attitude that Ripley does, which is like, let's get the fuck out of here. Let's do it the right way and get the fuck out of here. But if I come face to face with the alien, the odds of surviving it are very small. Let's be honest. Ripley is a 4-leaf clover. She's the luckiest woman alive. She's come face to face with it multiple times and continues to survive it, despite no chance of being able to survive it. But she does. But I think I could survive it.
So I'm playing the devil's advocate in sense of like putting myself in the crew member's shoes and saying, like my greatest praise for this movie is how smartly written Ripley is as a character, that she is the smartest person in the room and she makes all the right choices. Now, part of the reason I praise that is because I like to think of myself as a very analytical, logical person. And again, one of the reasons I pick apart some badly written horror movies is because I'm like, no one would do that. Like even in the dumbest disconnect, bad choices of horror movies, no one would do that. Like that bugs me when it's just so obvious that a person would not do that. I'd like to think I would slip into the Ripley role where I'm like, don't let them on the ship. What the fuck are you doing?
Totally.
Keep them out of here. Freeze him. Don't let him come in here and examine it. Don't examine shit. Freeze this guy. Let him go. Let the scientists at home deal with this guy. I'm not dealing with it. I would like to think I would be Ripley in that sense. But the problem is, once the alien gets out and it's in the Nostromo, it's just a roll of the dice.
Yeah.
Parker and Lambert aren't doing anything stupid. They're getting cooling canisters together to put onto the ship so they can all survive, because they say early on, which I appreciate a little attention to detail, when there's still more of them alive, why don't we all just get on the ship, on the escape pod and get out of here? And it says, well, there's not enough room on there for 4 people, not enough life support for 4 people. They're like, what are we going to do, draw straws, like, to survive? Obviously, people keep getting picked off, and then by the end, it's only 3 of them, and they're like, fuck it, we're taking our chances. But we need these canisters to, like, give us a chance to make it with an escape pod that's meant for, we assume, 2, I guess. I can't remember, either 1, maybe. I can't remember what the actual pod is looking in there. So what Parker and Lambert are doing isn't stupid. They're doing it as a means to survive. They're doing it so they have a chance to get on this escape pod. So I'd like to think I'd be one of them, but I'd still be fucked. Like, I'm not doing the dumb thing. I'm not the guy volunteering to crawl through the air ducts like Dallas, and I'm certainly not, Kane being the dumbest one to go down into the chamber and be like, let me see what these eggs do.
Right. Yeah,
I
Kane
know
was the stupidest of all.
I know I'm not that guy. You know what I mean? I know I'm
Yeah.
not that guy, and I know I'm not Brett going to, now, granted, if it was one of my dogs, I would throw down with the alien to save my dog. But fuck that cat. I wouldn't go searching for the cat. So, I'm not Brett. I'm not, I'd like to think I'm some combination of Parker and Ripley, which they both seem to be fairly smart in the way they approach this thing. But again, the problem is Parker did nothing wrong. He was one of the smart guys, but he still died. So that's kind of where I'm at. Like, I'd like to think that I would be the smart one, but I also know just happenstance of being in a fucking ship with a murderous alien that there's a chance I'm going to get an alien's tail up my ass.
Yeah, there's a very good chance that's happening. I will tell you something that Parker was doing wrong. He was being way too loud with those coolant tanks.
Yeah.
Like, they were being so loud with them, and I'm like,
Lambert was being loud.
She was like tossing them, and clanging. I mean, I was like, you guys are making way too much noise. And that's where, if I was in that situation, I'd be like, stop fucking throwing the cans. You're gonna call that thing over here.
But in the panicked moment, I get it. Like, they're just trying to get the fuck out as quickly as possible. So she's just yanking the canisters and chucking them down and like, let's get out of here. I get it.
Yeah, I get it. But boy, that sealed her fate for sure.
But that's what I'm saying. Like, even in that moment, they're not like, oh, let's go look around the ship and see if Dallas made it. Fuck no. Just get out of there. And
no one has that. Yeah, no one has that stupid moment where they go, I'm going to take this fucker on. You know what I mean? Like, nobody, like, and that happens in a lot of horror movies. Yeah. And most people cheer it. Like, you're in an audience with someone who's like, I'm not going out without a fight. Fuck you. You're not winning that fight.
Yeah.
You're not winning the fight. You're not going to fight that thing. We're getting the fuck out of here. And they all made the right choice. And I've said it before, Damon, and I'll say it again. True horror is when your characters make the right decision and it still doesn't work. That's exactly what happens in this movie.
Yeah, the hierarchy of smarts in this movie goes Ripley to Parker. Like, Ripley is the one who is the smartest one in the room and makes all the best decisions. Parker being second best. He's the one who says, why did you let them on the ship? Why don't we just freeze this guy?
Yep.
Let's get the fuck out of here. But still, he's the one who's like, I'll get the canisters because that's what we need to survive. We had to have them. And he still dies. So that's where I kind of feel like I would like to believe I'd make the decisions of Ripley saying we don't need to go to this ship. We certainly don't need to let this guy on board, all those things. But then as you and I are, Parker and Brett's understudies, we would be the ones to be like, well, hold on, we got to go get this canister so we have life support to make it. And then the alien comes and just, fucking crucifies us both. So I'm saying I wouldn't survive just because the odds are against it.
The odds are against you, definitely.
Yeah. Last category, Patrick. I feel like I know the answer to this one after our discussion here, which is always, is it scary? So, Alien, at the end of the day, is it scary?
You know what's funny is this movie has never scared or terrified me. I've always been just genuinely fascinated by how great it is. Like, it just circumvents like fear and all that stuff. But to analyze it for our podcast and to analyze it for what a movie needs to be scary, it has tons of dread. Atmosphere. The atmosphere in this thing is through the roof. The atmosphere of this movie is nothing is safe. Nowhere you go is safe. In space, no one can hear you scream. I mean, it's just, this thing it's in the DNA of this movie, that fear and panic and fright and terror and gore and blood and guts and killing, they're all there. It's just done in such a beautiful way that you end up enjoying it. I mean, certainly the girl sitting next to me at the movie theater, she may have shit herself. I'm not sure. I couldn't smell anything, but she was scared. She got scared. This is a scary movie.
This is 100% a scary movie. It might be the scariest sci-fi movie, to be honest. Like,
it's up there.
I'd have to dig into like all the scary sci-fi movies, but this
Event Horizon's like disturbing in its own weird way. It's a very different movie.
It's very different. It's good, but I don't even know if I'd put it on that level. Like, as far as Alien, like, again, simplistic, surprising, stunning, and it works. Again, just the face hugger and the chest burster scene alone make this a scary movie, because two things that something bad's gonna happen and you still don't see it coming. You look down into a fucking alien egg, I know something bad's gonna happen, but I didn't necessarily see what happened happening. The chestburster scene. I knew Kane was not okay. We all knew Kane was not okay. Did I necessarily think a creature was going to literally crunch through his chest and burst out and look like a silver-toothed cock? No, I didn't think that at the time. So, yes, this movie is absolutely scary. Like I said, my biggest regret, and through no fault of my own, I was a kid. My biggest regret is that I didn't get to see this first. Like that I already had an idea of what this movie was before I saw it, because it's funny. I remember I talked about seeing Spaceballs first and the scene with John Hurt in that movie.
Yeah.
I actually, what, crazy. Back in the day, they used to show full-length movies on CBS on like Saturday nights. Do you remember this?
Mm-hmm.
And they used to have a Saturday night like science fiction or horror show, and it would start like 8:00, and the movies were like 4 hours long because all the commercials. They did Aliens. That's the first time I ever saw Aliens, was on a Saturday night CBS movie of the week. And what I remember about that is they actually showed the director's cut. They showed because when I saw Aliens from start to finish on like a DVD or a VHS after that, I was like, where are those scenes? And it wasn't until years later that I discovered the CBS version, they added in all of the extra shit that they eventually did in like the director's cut. It was wild. I was like, where is the scene? And it's not there. So that was my first experience with Aliens, was on a CBS 8:00 Saturday night movie when I was a kid, and Spaceballs. And then, later I saw Aliens. So my biggest regret, and again, through no fault of my own, I wish I would have seen Alien and seen it in order and been totally surprised by this movie. Still works, still effective, still adore it. But one of my biggest regrets is I didn't get to experience this fresh as like a new movie viewer, that I was like, I remember where I was when I saw the chestburster scene.
And if it's any testament to how scary this movie is, my kids have seen Aliens. They've watched the whole damn thing. And they loved it. I mean, they ate it up. They were like, what the fuck is this? The coolest fucking movie you've ever shown us? Because it's rad. They still haven't seen Alien, and they don't want to. They're scared of it. You know what I mean? Like it has a reputation. So if that's any indication of just the kind of scary we're dealing with, Alien, I'm not going to make any predictions yet, but I'm pretty sure that Alien is the scariest of the entire Alien franchise by far.
Yeah, I think that's safe to say. I mean, again, we could, we'll debate at the end, because again, I'll being honest, like Aliens is one of my all-time like top 5 favorite movies ever. I can recite that movie from start to finish and characters, and that's going to be our next review in this franchise, of course. That's where you'll get to hear me fillet it like it's a silver-toothed cock or whatever. But yeah, Alien is incredible, and this is, like I said, this again. Just to reiterate what I said at the very start of the show, this is the best 1-2 punch combo of like movie history, maybe, because
I think so.
They're both in the same world, the same universe. They are similar yet so different. But again, you said you made the other comparison is perfect to Terminator 2, because I actually like Terminator better than I like Terminator 2. I love Terminator 2. Terminator 2 is a fantastic film. But I still like and I think Terminator is the more horror of the Terminator films. Terminator 2 is more science fiction than it is that. Aliens is more action than it is horror. There are horror elements for sure.
Yes.
But it's more action, and then this is more horror. And it's kind of funny. It's flip-flop for me, where I'm like, and again, it's a shade different. Like I think part of it is because I saw Aliens first. I'm not gonna lie, like I saw it first, and I attached myself to those characters and Hudson and Hicks and all that stuff. So that's probably part of it. But I absolutely adore Alien, and it is. I'll say it. This is your favorite film of all time. I would say this is the definition of a perfect science fiction horror film. Like the only criticism I have of this movie is fuck that cat. Like that's literally my only criticism of Jonesy. That's it. And that's a joke. I'm not being serious. But like,
right, yeah.
I have no real criticisms about this movie. None.
I'm telling you, it's my favorite film because it's perfect. Because I wouldn't change a thing. I mean, when you could, we used to have a category called Rewrite of the Living Dead, and boy, we used it a lot. This is a movie where I go, don't touch anything.
Yeah.
Don't touch a single thing on this. Don't touch a hair on its head. It's
Don't
perfect.
let George Lucas near this film.
No, get away, George. Go the other way, the other direction, George. You're not welcome here.
Yeah.
All love, George, but no, this is not for you.
Yeah,
it's perfect. It's absolutely a perfect movie.
And that's how you start a franchise review. All right, folks. That is our episode. We are going to be doing these. If you've done our franchise reviews with us before, we've done Texas Chainsaw Massacre and we've done Nightmare on Elm Street. The episodes are not on like a linear path, meaning we won't just release these one after the other. There are going to be new films, other podcasts to pop in here. So it takes time to get through all the movies. But obviously, we're doing Alien now. We will do Aliens next, Alien 3, Alien Resurrection, Prometheus, Get Your God, and then Alien Revenant.
Covenant, yeah.
Alien Covenant. Why did I say Revenant? Alien Covenant. And you know what? I feel like we got to close it out with like doing a quick like half-hour review of Alien versus Predator movies. I feel like we got to do just a quick one.
You will not get me to sit down for 4 hours and watch those movies. That's the problem.
Just a quick, like, what the fuck were they thinking? But yeah, we're in the main 6 films in a row. And so it's going to come. This is our franchise review for 2024. We are excited to do this one because, as we've stated numerous times, Alien is your favorite movie and Aliens is top 5 movie for me all time. So this is why we had to do this franchise. So that is our first episode in the Alien franchise. At this point, we've gone longer than Alien.
We've done 2 Alien.
I'm assuming you've all seen Alien at this point. If you haven't, holy shit, did we just ruin this movie for you? But go watch it again. Here's my advice. To anyone listening to the show that's made it all the way through this end, seriously, go watch it again and look at all the little things we mentioned, the sexual references, the nuances of Ash, all the little things we talked about. Go and rewatch it and see if you don't see what we're talking about here, because you and I are obsessives who have seen this movie 30 times. Most normal, average people are not watching any movie 30 times. But yeah, go watch it and see if you catch all the little nuances we're talking about here. The horniness of the movie, the Ash disconnection of the movie, all the little things we talked about. Go watch it and see if you find those as well.
Yeah, you will not find one unbroken seam.
Yeah, it's all incredible. All right. That's our episode. As always, if you got questions, comments, movies you'd like us to review, you got comments on Alien, we'd love to hear your comments on Alien.
Please.
Send us an email at rotlivingdead@gmail.com. That's rotlivingdead@gmail.com, or find us on all of our social media platforms. Just search Rewind of the Living Dead on Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter/X. We love to get your messages. We love to get your comments. When we drop this episode, please let us know what you thought. What did you think the first time you saw the chest burster scene or the face hugger scene? Or what was your experience of Alien? Did you see Spaceballs like me and have it ruined for you? I'd love to hear that. If somebody else knows the first time they saw it was watching Bill Pullman and John Candy looking at the alien popping out of his chest.
If someone out there that listens to us was in the movie theater in 1979, you must email us.
Yes.
You must email us and tell us what it was like. I have to know what it was like in the theater when people saw that.
Yeah, I'd love to hear that reaction. Absolutely. So yeah, please send us that message. We'd love to hear from you guys. Also, as always, check us out on all your favorite podcast platforms: Apple Podcasts, Spotify, iHeartRadio, Amazon Podcasts, Google Podcasts, and of course over on my website, nerdcoremovement.com, or just search anywhere you get your podcast. Just search Rewind of the Living Dead and you'll find us over there. And you can also hit us up on our own personal social media channels. I am at Damon Martin, and you are?
At Director Patrick.
And a big thank you, as always, to everyone that tunes in. We are so excited to get into our latest franchise review. This was a big one for us. So enjoy Alien. Go watch it. Enjoy your silver-toothed cock. We're going to do that as well. And we'll see you back next week for another edition of Rewind of the Living Dead. Thanks for tuning in. We'll see you then.
Happy New Year.